Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the ancient art of stone cutting in Egypt, an era where the rhythmic chisel of skilled hands transformed rugged rock into timeless monuments. And surprisingly, much of this arduous work was done not by slaves, but by skilled laborers who found dignity in their craft. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. The sun's barely peeking over the horizon, and you're already up with the roosters, or whatever noisy creature signals morning in ancient Egypt. Forget your modern alarm clock. Here, it's nature's relentless call that drags you from sleep. You stretch, feeling every muscle protesting the day ahead. It's not just any day. You're a stone cutter, and your workplace is the vast, echoing quarry. Your tools are waiting, but they're not your average Home Depot haul. Get ready to meet the copper chisel and dolerite hammerstone, your companions in this ancient endeavor. Let's start with that copper chisel. It's not just a piece of metal. It's the result of a sophisticated process. Copper, mind you, was the bee's knees in ancient Egypt. Imported from Sinai, it was a prized possession. The cost, high enough that you guard it like your firstborn. This isn't some slapdash operation. The chisel is crafted with precision, hammered into shape by those who know that a shoddy tool means a shoddy monument. And in a place where your legacy could be a pyramid visible from miles away, nobody's cutting corners. Now, let's talk about the dolerite hammerstone. This bad boy is your heavy hitter, literally. Dolerite is no walk in the park to acquire. It's volcanic, hard as a rock, no pun intended, and perfect for pounding away at limestone. The ancient Egyptians didn't just snatch up any old stone lying around. Oh no, they picked dolerite for its durability. It's like choosing a sledgehammer over a rubber mallet. You need this because you're not just carving out a bit of rock. You're helping create something monumental, something that could stand for millennia. As you step into the quarry, the morning light illuminating the dust in the air, you're stepping into a world of sound. The clang of metal on stone, the grunts of workers, the crack of rock splitting under pressure. You've got your work cut out for you, literally. The sheer scale of these projects is mind-boggling. Think about it. The Great Pyramid of Giza required around 2-3 million blocks of stone. That's not a typo. And you're part of this machine, ensuring each piece is cut just right. But why go through all this trouble? Why not just grab the nearest rock and call it a day? Well, here's the scoop. The Egyptians weren't just builders. They were artists, visionaries. Limestone for the core, granite for the chamber. Each stone was chosen for its properties. Limestone, abundant and relatively easy to cut, was perfect for the bulk. Granite, with its strength and beauty, was reserved for the sacred spaces that would house the departed pharaohs. And here's a fun twist. The tools you're wielding, those copper chisels and hammerstones, would wear down faster than a cheap pair of shoes. It wasn't just a matter of picking the right stone. You had to factor in the cost and effort of maintaining your tools. The chisels needed constant sharpening, and every strike with the hammerstone was a reminder of the labor-intensive reality of your craft. So as you stand there in the quarry, that early morning sun now a bit higher in the sky, you're not just a worker, you're part of a legacy. You're shaping history, one hammer blow at a time. Sure, it's grueling work, but there's something almost poetic about the rhythm of it all, the way you and your fellow cutters chip away at the stone, each strike echoing through the ages. You're not just building monuments, you're building something that might outlast civilizations. And as the day wears on, with sweat trickling down your back and your muscles aching, you know that every ounce of effort is etched into the very fabric of history. As the sun climbs higher in the Egyptian sky, you're knee-deep in the daily grind of stone extraction, and it's not the kind of grind you brag about over coffee. But don't let the sweat and dirt fool you. There's a method to this dusty madness, and you're part of a finely tuned machine that's more organized than your average office. The logistics of quarrying in ancient Egypt were nothing short of a marvel. Picture this. Thousands of workers, each with a specific role, all coordinated like an elaborate symphony where the conductor is a taskmaster and the instruments are made of stone. Moving these massive blocks wasn't just about brawn. It was an exercise in brains. You've got limestone blocks weighing up to 15 tons each, and granite ones that tip the scales at a hefty 70 tons. Forget about the idea of simple brute force. This is where ingenuity comes in. Ramps, sledges, and sheer human willpower were the tools of the trade. The Egyptians were the original problem solvers, figuring out how to transport these behemoths across distances that could make a marathon look like a stroll in the park. And here's a juicy nugget to chew on. The workforce behind these monumental tasks wasn't composed of slaves, as popular myths would have you believe. Sure, the image of thousands of downtrodden slaves toiling away under the whip makes for a dramatic narrative, but the reality is far more nuanced. These were skilled laborers, craftsmen who took pride in their work. They were well-fed, housed in purpose-built communities, and even had time for lunch breaks that would make a modern office worker jealous. Ancient records show they feasted on bread, beer, and onions. Yes, you heard that right, onions. A diet that might make your breath a weapon, but kept them fueled for the day's labor. Economically, this whole operation was a testament to the sheer power and wealth of pharaonic Egypt. The cost of these projects was astronomical, but when your PR game involves constructing something visible from space, you don't exactly skimp on the budget. Pharaohs weren't just building tombs, they were making statements. These constructions were as much about legacy and power as they were about the afterlife. The labor force was organized into teams, sometimes referred to as gangs, each with a name that would strike fear or awe. Think, the followers of the powerful white crown of the pharaoh. Catchy, right? Each gang had its own hierarchy, with foremen and skilled workers ensuring that everything ran as smoothly as a sand dune in a windstorm. And while it's easy to romanticize the idea of working under the shadow of a future wonder of the world, the reality was a grind. Blisters, sunburn, and the constant grit of sand in places you didn't know sand could reach were part of the daily package. The logistics of quarrying weren't just about extraction. They involved careful planning of resources, from the copper chisels and dolerite hammerstones to the food and water supply for the workforce. It was an ancient version of a supply chain, one that had to be meticulously managed to ensure that the construction of these colossal structures didn't come to a grinding halt. In the middle of this organized chaos, you can't help but marvel at the sheer human spirit involved. There's a certain romance in the relentless pursuit of creating something that defies time and elements. But peel back the layers, and you find a gritty reality. These workers toiled under the sun, driven by the promise of food, shelter, and the pride of contributing to something greater than themselves. It's a story of human ingenuity and perseverance, wrapped in the sands of time. But before we get too misty-eyed, let's remember the economic engine driving this process. The construction of pyramids was more than a showcase of architectural prowess. It was a massive economic activity that fueled trade and industry. Copper for chisels, food for workers, and the materials needed for construction all had to be sourced and financed. The economy of ancient Egypt was a complex organism, and these monumental projects were its heartbeat. So, as you stand there, hammerstone in hand, watching the sun inch toward its zenith, you're not just part of a workforce. You're a cog in a grand machine of human history. Every chisel mark, every block moved, every drop of sweat is a testament to a civilization's drive to etch its legacy into the annals of time. And while the sun might be unrelenting and the work exhausting, there's a certain poetry in knowing that you're carving out a piece of history, one that will stand long after you've laid down your tools. As the day progresses, the sun casts long shadows over the quarry, and the realization dawns that this grand endeavor is as much about the people as it is about the stones. But hold that thought. There's more to unpack about the lives of these ancient artisans and the economic wheels that kept this civilization turning. Stay tuned, because this epic tale is far from over. As the sun reaches that unforgiving zenith, casting long shadows over the quarry, your midday break is as welcome as a cool breeze in the desert. The air smells of sweat and dust, but there's an underlying scent of something more satisfying: your lunch. Bread, beer, and onions, the trifecta of ancient Egyptian sustenance, await you. It's a meal that might not win any Michelin stars, but it fuels the workforce like a well-oiled machine. And let's be real, after a morning of pounding stone with a dolerite hammer, you'd eat just about anything. Lunch is over in a flash. No time for a leisurely siesta here. With the blazing sun nudging you back to reality, it's time to head to the construction site. Here's where the real magic happens. and not the kind that involves wands or spells. We're talking about the logistical wizardry of moving massive stone blocks, each weighing as much as a herd of elephants, without a single engine in sight. Forget forklifts or cranes. These ancient engineers had nothing more than ramps, sledges, and elbow grease. Now, let's break down the process of moving these behemoths. The key player here, the sledge. Imagine a giant, flat-bottomed sled designed to glide over sand with the help of a little water. Yes, water. Ancient Egyptians discovered that a bit of H2O reduced friction, letting the sled move more smoothly. It's like greasing the wheels, only with water and sand. This simple trick was a game changer, and it's a testament to their ingenuity. With the block securely on the sledge, it's time to get moving. Picture a team of workers, easily 100 strong, straining against ropes, their muscles taut as bowstrings. Each pull is a synchronized effort, a choreography of sheer determination and strength. It's like a tug-of-war with the earth itself, except the earth is losing. And here's a little nugget to chew on. Estimates suggest they moved these stones at the brisk pace of about 6 to 9 miles per day. That's right, a feat of endurance and coordination worthy of an Olympic event. But let's not get too carried away in admiration without addressing the elephant in the room, or should I say the pyramid. Myths abound about these construction feats. You've heard the tales: aliens, lost technology, or even divine intervention. While those make for thrilling bedtime stories, the reality is far more grounded. The pyramids weren't built by extraterrestrial architects, but by teams of skilled workers who knew their craft inside out. They didn't need a UFO to lift the stones. They had manpower and smarts. Now, let's talk about ramps. These weren't your run-of-the-mill playground slides. The Egyptians engineered ramps so cunningly that they could rival any modern architectural feat. Design was crucial, steep enough to be efficient, but gentle enough to prevent accidents. A misstep here could turn a block of limestone into a runaway freight train. There's ongoing debate among historians about the exact design of these ramps, straight, zigzag, or spiral. The evidence is as elusive as a mirage, but it's clear they had a system that worked. Once the block reached its destination, the placement was nothing short of a carefully orchestrated ballet. Precision was key. These stones fit together so snugly that it said a knife blade couldn't slide between them. This is where the artisans stepped in, chiseling and adjusting each block with a level of detail that baffles modern architects. They didn't have lasers or computers, just a keen eye and a steady hand. Economically, this massive construction effort was a showcase of Egypt's might. Imagine the resources needed, not just materials, but food, shelter, and tools for thousands of workers. The economic wheels that kept this machine running were nothing short of a marvel. It was a colossal investment, but for the pharaohs, it was worth every grain of sand. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were monuments to their glory, a PR campaign in stone. But before we start romanticizing this ancient world as some kind of utopia of noble labor, let's pull back the curtain. These workers, skilled as they were, toiled under harsh conditions. The sun was relentless, and the work was back-breaking. Blisters, sunburn, and exhaustion were constant companions. And while they were well-fed and housed, their daily grind was a far cry from the grandeur of the monuments they built. So, as the afternoon sun beats down, casting long shadows over the construction site, you're not just witnessing history, you're a part of it. Every stone moved, every block placed, is a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. It's a story of sweat, grit, and determination, wrapped in the sands of time. And while the myths of alien architects make for tantalizing tales, the reality is far richer. It's a story of human spirit, of ordinary people achieving extraordinary feats. As the shadows lengthen and the day draws to a close, you can't help but marvel at the sheer scale of this endeavor. It's a story still unfolding, with more layers to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to reveal. So, stay tuned, because this epic tale is far from over. There's more to explore, more to question, and more to admire in this grand saga of stone and sweat. As the shadows lengthen, and the day draws to a close, you can't help but marvel at the sheer scale of this endeavor. But before you pack up your tools and call it a day, it's time to shift gears from the brawn of stone, moving to the brainy beauty of stone cutting. Welcome to the artistic side of ancient Egyptian masonry, where chisels become paintbrushes and stone blocks transform into canvases of storytelling. Here's the thing. In ancient Egypt, stones weren't just building materials. They were the storytelling medium of the gods. Hieroglyphs and intricate carvings adorned temples, tombs, and monuments, each symbol more than a mere decorative touch. These were the Instagram posts of the ancient world, broadcasting messages across time and sand. So, how did they do it? Let's dive into the techniques that made this possible. First, picture a master craftsman at work. These artisans weren't the run-of-the-mill carvers. They were highly skilled, often trained in workshops sponsored by the state. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a career with prestige. Turning raw stone into intricate carvings required a deft hand and a sharp eye, not unlike a modern-day sculptor. The primary tools of the trade were copper chisels and flint scrapers, along with a healthy dose of patience. Copper was softer than iron, which means it needed frequent sharpening, a task as tedious as it sounds but crucial for precision. The artisans used grids to trace out designs, ensuring proportions were spot on. It's like drafting a blueprint before constructing a skyscraper. Every detail was planned, every line intentional. Hieroglyphs, those iconic symbols, weren't just pretty pictures. They were a complex written language with over 700 symbols. Each one told a part of a story, whether it was detailing the life of a pharaoh or offering prayers to the gods. These symbols conveyed power, religion, and daily life, all etched in stone. And let's not forget the economic angle. These carvings were a way to immortalize wealth and power in the most permanent way possible. Now, let's sprinkle in some myth-busting. The image of the lone genius carver is as misleading as a mirage. These artisans worked in teams, each member specializing in different aspects of the artwork. From the rough cutters who shaped the stone to the finer artists who added details, it was a collaborative effort. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a film crew, each person bringing their expertise to the table. And speaking of tables, let's set one with some hard facts. Great Pyramid alone boasts more than 4,000 stone blocks with hieroglyphs. That's a lot of storytelling. These inscriptions were as much about politics as they were about religion. Pharaohs used them to assert their divine right to rule, a power move that makes modern political ads look like child's play. On the symbolic side, these carvings were steeped in meaning. Take the Ankh, for example, a hieroglyph representing life. It pops up everywhere, from tombs to jewelry, a reminder that life and death were deeply interconnected in Egyptian belief. And then there's the scarab beetle, a symbol of transformation and rebirth. The Egyptians loved their symbols so much they practically turned them into a second language, one that could be read by gods and men alike. But let's not romanticize too much. This was hard, painstaking work. Imagine hunching over a block of stone for hours, the sun beating down, sweat dripping into your eyes. The stakes were high, too. One misstep, one wrong chisel mark, and you could ruin weeks of work. The pressure was as heavy as the stones themselves. Despite the challenges, these artisans were respected figures in society. They were not only craftsmen, but also cultural historians, their work preserving the narratives of a civilization. It's a role that demanded skill and creativity, with a dash of political savvy. The artisans knew which gods and pharaohs needed flattering, and their work reflected that knowledge. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the stonework, you realize that these carvers were doing more than creating art. They were shaping cultural identity. Their work was a public declaration, a stone newspaper chronicling the reigns of kings and the whims of gods. It's a legacy that would outlast the sands of time, a testament to the enduring power of human expression. And just like that, the afternoon slips into evening, the quarry slowly quieting as tools are downed and dust settles. It's time to head back, leaving behind the echoes of chisels and the whisper of stories told in stone. But don't get too comfortable. There's still more to uncover in this epic saga. The story of these ancient artists and their monumental creations isn't finished yet, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue. Stay tuned, because the tale of Egypt's stone-cutting artisans is far from over. As you meander back from the quarry, the desert air cooling with the approach of evening, it's hard not to ponder the vast tapestry of human history woven by the hands of those ancient Egyptian stone cutters. Their legacy is as enduring as the pyramids themselves, a testament to the indefatigable human spirit. But let's peel back the veil of romanticism and dive headfirst into the bedrock of reality that shaped these monumental endeavors. First, let's talk politics. Pharaohs weren't just building these colossal structures for the afterlife. They were cementing their power on earth. Kind of ancient PR campaign, if you will. Imagine the political clout of having a structure like the Pyramid of Khufu, towering at 481 feet, dominating the skyline. It screamed, "I'm not just a king, I'm a living god." The sheer scale of these projects was a visual testament to power, stability, and divine favor, a message as clear as any tweet from the top. The drive to build wasn't just about ego, though that definitely played a part. These projects were also catalysts for economic activity, akin to a good old-fashioned stimulus package. The immense workforce required to construct these marvels was fed, housed, and organized, creating an entire economy around construction. Think of it as the ancient world's version of infrastructure investment. Copper chisels didn't just appear out of thin air. They were mined, traded, and crafted, driving commerce and innovation. Now, let's sprinkle in some social factors. These weren't slave-driven labor camps, despite what Hollywood might have you believe. The workers were skilled artisans and laborers, organized into well-coordinated teams, lived in purpose-built villages with amenities that rivaled modern workplace perks. Daily rations included bread, beer, and onions. Basic, sure, but nourishing. It wasn't all sunshine and pyramids, though. Working conditions were harsh, and the sun was relentless. Still, there was a sense of pride in contributing to something that would last longer than their lifetimes. Let's not forget the myth-busting session. The allure of mystical Egypt is powerful, with its tales of curses, hidden chambers, and alien architects. But reality, as always, is both grittier and more impressive. No UFOs or lost civilizations here, just human ingenuity and a relentless work ethic. The ramps, sledges, and lever systems employed to move stones were feats of engineering brilliance, not wizardry. The pyramids weren't just built by human hands, they were built by human minds. The architectural impact of these structures is nothing short of monumental. The precision with which these stones were cut and placed has baffled generations. Consider this. The Great Pyramid's base is 755 feet on each side, with a deviation of just 58 millimeters. That's craftsmanship that would make any modern architect break out in a cold sweat. This precision wasn't just for show. It was a declaration of technical prowess that echoed through the ages. These structures influenced not only their contemporaries, but also future civilizations. The Greeks, Romans, and even modern architects have drawn inspiration from their grandeur and complexity. Economically, the ripple effects of these projects were profound. The construction required a constant flow of resources: copper from Sinai, limestone from Tura, granite from Aswan, all of which fueled trade networks across the ancient world. These weren't just local endeavors. They were international collaborations. The wealth generated and circulated by these projects contributed to Egypt's status as a superpower of its time. And now, the legacy. The lasting impact of these monumental projects is as much about the people who built them as the stones themselves. The stone cutters, artisans, and laborers left behind more than structures. They left a legacy of human resilience and creativity. They remind us that great achievements aren't born from myth and magic, but from sweat, skill, and determination. The pyramids stand as a testament to what humanity can achieve when driven by vision and ambition. So, as you finally lay down your tools and allow the day's labor to settle into your bones, take a moment to reflect. These monuments, with their imposing facades and intricate carvings, are more than just historical artifacts. They are symbols of human potential. They encapsulate the marriage of art and engineering, politics and economy, myth and reality. In the grand tapestry of history, the stone cutters of ancient Egypt are a vibrant thread, their legacy carved into the very fabric of our cultural heritage. Their stories remind us that while the allure of myth is strong, the truth of human achievement is even stronger. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the knowledge of their enduring legacy lull you into dreams of pyramids and pharaohs, of stone and sweat. And remember, every block, every chisel strike, every sunburn earned under the relentless Egyptian sun was a step in the long journey of human history. Rest well, knowing that their story, and ours, continues to unfold, one stone at a time. In the land of sand, sun, and some rather peculiar fashion choices, the ancient Egyptians built a civilization that worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with more personality quirks than your average reality TV cast. At the heart of their religious fervor was Ra, the sun god, who rode across the sky in his solar boat, presumably with more horsepower than a Ferrari. Ra was the big cheese, the head honcho, the god who had the ultimate desk with a view. He wasn't just responsible for the sun rising and setting. He was the embodiment of order, a necessary counter to the chaos that threatened to consume the world. Right alongside Ra in the celestial VIP lounge was Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Osiris had a gig that was as morbid as it was significant. He wasn't just a glorified funeral director. He was the judge and gatekeeper of the dead. Think of him as the ultimate HR manager of the underworld, deciding who got the eternal promotion to the afterlife and who got the pink slip. But Osiris didn't start off in the afterlife. He was murdered by his brother Set, chopped into pieces and scattered across Egypt, certainly a family quarrel that puts your awkward Thanksgiving dinners to shame. Thankfully, his wife Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, had the dedication and magical prowess to collect his body parts and bring him back to life. Talk about commitment. Now, let's not forget Isis, who was basically the ancient world's go-to-problem solver. Need to resurrect your husband? Isis. Need to protect your child? Isis. Need to perform a spell that defies the laws of nature? Yep, you guessed it. Isis. She was revered not just for her magical skills, but also as an ideal mother and wife, proving that multitasking was a divine trait long before it became a buzzword on LinkedIn. But worshipping these gods wasn't just about tossing a prayer into the ether and hoping for the best. The Egyptians had a serious gig going with their temples, which were less like places of worship and more like bustling community centers. Visiting a temple was akin to attending a combination of a religious service, a town hall meeting, and a farmer's market. The priests were the gatekeepers of divine favor, ensuring that rituals were performed with the precision of a Swiss watch. And it wasn't cheap. Offerings to the gods could include bread, beer, oxen, and geese. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a luxury gift basket, but with more feathers. Wealthier Egyptians might even donate land or precious goods, ensuring that their spiritual credit score stayed high. The calendar of holy days was a complex beast, with more festivals than a college town during spring break. These weren't just excuses to party, though there was plenty of that. Festivals were a way to ensure the continued goodwill of the gods, a crucial task in a world where a bad flood or a dry season could spell disaster. From the Apet festival to celebrate Ammon, their god of air and sun, to the beautiful Feast of the Valley honoring the dead, each event was a blend of solemn rituals and lively celebrations. It was a religious rhythm that beat in time with the Nile's annual flood, a cycle that defined not just agriculture, but the entire Egyptian worldview. Despite the grandeur and the mystery, the practicalities of Egyptian religious life were, let's be honest, a bit of a slog. Temples required constant upkeep, and priests had to perform daily rituals, including washing, dressing, and feeding the gods' statues. Yes, you heard that right, feeding statues. It turns out that divine beings, while immortal, still appreciated a good meal, or at least the symbolic gesture of one. And let's not overlook the nitty-gritty of temple economics. Maintaining these spiritual powerhouses was costly, and they often owned large tracts of land worked by peasants whose labor funded not just their own survival, but the splendor of their deities' earthly abode. For all the myth and magic, Egyptian religion was as much about the mundane as the mystical. It was the story of people striving to placate capricious gods in a world that could be as harsh and unforgiving as the desert sun. It was about finding order in chaos, life in death, and meaning in the vast, unknowable universe that stretched above them. A universe populated by gods who were, perhaps, not so different from the people who worshipped them. Just as the Egyptians sought to find order in chaos, their myths were not just bedtime stories for the ancient world. They were the blueprints for understanding everything from the flood of the Nile to the flood of emotions at a family dinner where someone brings up politics. Let's dive into one of their most riveting tales, a myth with more twists and turns than a soap opera marathon, the betrayal of Osiris by his brother Set. This saga is more than just a family feud. It's a narrative that shaped Egyptian beliefs about life, death, and everything in between. Osiris wasn't just any sibling. He was the golden child, the one who made his parents beam with pride at every family reunion. He ruled Egypt with fairness and wisdom, bringing civilization to a world that was previously about as orderly as a toddler's playroom. Enter Set, his brother, who had a personality as stormy as the deserts he was associated with. Set was envious, cue the dramatic music, of Osiris's popularity and success. So, Set did what any self-respecting villain in a dramatic plot would do. He hatched a plan that was as cunning as it was gruesome. He invited Osiris to a banquet and presented a beautifully crafted box, promising it to whoever fit perfectly inside. Spoiler alert, it was custom-made for Osiris. The moment Osiris laid down, Set and his accomplices sealed the box and tossed it into the Nile like yesterday's laundry. Now, you might think this story is purely mythological melodrama, but it carried weighty cultural significance. Osiris's murder wasn't just a tale of sibling rivalry. It symbolized the eternal struggle between order and chaos, a theme as timeless as Egyptian love for feline deities. His dismemberment and subsequent scattering represented the fragmentation of Egypt itself, a land divided by internal strife and external threats. Makes your last family squabble seem pretty tame, doesn't it? But wait, there's more. Enter Isis, Osiris's wife, and the ancient world's equivalent of a superhero. She wasn't about to let Set get away with his dastardly deeds. Embarking on a nationwide scavenger hunt that would put modern escape rooms to shame, Isis gathered Osiris's body parts from their scattered locations across Egypt. Talk about dedication. Stitching him back together, she used her magical prowess to breathe life into him once more, allowing Osiris to rule the afterlife, a promotion of sorts, if you ignore the whole being dead part. This myth wasn't just a juicy tale for the Egyptians to share over a pint of beer. Yes, they loved their brews. It was a narrative that reinforced societal norms and values. Osiris's resurrection and role as the Lord of the Dead underscored the importance of mad, or cosmic order, and the belief that life continued beyond the grave. It was a comforting thought for a civilization that spent a significant portion of its GDP on elaborate burial practices. But let's pause for a quick reality check here. Did any of this actually happen? Archaeologically speaking, there's as much evidence for Osiris's literal resurrection as there is for Elvis still flipping burgers in a Memphis diner. Yet, the myths held power because they provided a framework for understanding the unpredictable whims of fate and the cycle of life and death. They were the ancient equivalent of a motivational poster, reminding Egyptians that order could conquer chaos and that life, like the sun, would rise again. The story of Osiris and Set also had its economic and political ramifications. Temples dedicated to Osiris became centers of power and wealth, drawing pilgrims and their offerings like an ancient version of a tourist hotspot. The priesthood, wielding both religious authority and economic influence, played a pivotal role in maintaining the myth and its associated rituals. This wasn't just about faith. It was about ensuring a steady flow of income, much like today's megachurches with their televangelist empires. And let's not ignore the political nuances. The myth reinforced the idea of a divine kingship, with pharaohs portrayed as earthly incarnations of Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis. This celestial lineage was a handy tool for legitimizing their rule, a nifty piece of propaganda that kept the wheels of power turning smoothly. So, while Osiris's tale might seem like a fantastical yarn spun to entertain, it was interwoven with the threads of real-world implications. It provided a narrative structure that justified the social hierarchy, supported the economy, and ensured political stability. Not just a story, but a societal blueprint. In the end, the myth of Osiris and Set reminds us that stories, whether about gods or mortals, have the power to shape worlds. They offer us comfort, control, and a sense of continuity in a universe that can often feel as chaotic as Set's tempestuous storms. As we continue to explore the pantheon of Egyptian mythology, prepare for more tales that blend the mystical with the mundane, the legendary with the literal, and the cosmic with the comical. After all, when it comes to human history, the truth is often more fascinating, and occasionally more bizarre, than fiction. And speaking of stories that blend the mystical with the mundane, let's swivel the spotlight to those iconic figures strutting through ancient Egypt like they owned the place. Because, well, they did. Meet the pharaohs, the ultimate multitaskers who were part political leader, part divine entity, and full-time representatives of the gods on earth. Pharaohs were like the CEOs of ancient Egypt, only with more eyeliner and fewer spreadsheets. Their job description included everything from maintaining mad, that all-important cosmic order, to ensuring the Nile didn't run dry, all while commanding armies and building some of the most jaw-dropping monuments the world has ever seen. Talk about a packed schedule. Now, if you're thinking pharaohs were just rulers with delusions of grandeur, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. The pharaohs didn't just rule by right, they ruled by divine mandate. According to ancient Egyptian belief, each pharaoh was the living Horus, the falcon-headed god, and the son of Osiris and Isis. It was a neat trick to connect themselves to the gods, ensuring that their rule was literally written in the stars. This celestial endorsement was the ancient equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize, and a Grammy rolled into one, making it pretty hard to argue with their legitimacy. But it wasn't all divine glitz and glamour. The role of a pharaoh came with hefty responsibilities, not least of which was the economy. You see, running a kingdom the size of Egypt required more than a few prayers and a snazzy headdress. It took grain, lots of it. Grain was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, the staple of their diet, and the currency of their economy. Pharaohs needed to ensure a bumper harvest to feed their people and keep the state coffers full. Famine was their worst nightmare, as it could lead to chaos, revolt, or, heaven forbid, a bad Yelp review. And let's not forget the monumental ego projects. Temples and monuments. Take the Karnak Temple, a sprawling complex dedicated primarily to Amun-Ra, the king of gods. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was the ancient world's answer to Versailles, with columns so large you'd think they were compensating for something. Covering around 200 acres, Karnak was like an ancient construction site that never shut down, with additions and renovations spanning over 2,000 years. The temple was a statement piece, a testament to the pharaoh's power and piety, and a way to ensure they wouldn't be forgotten in a few dusty scrolls. The economic implications of building such grandiose structures were, to put it mildly, significant. These projects were like a national stimulus package, employing thousands of workers, from architects to laborers, who toiled under the blistering sun. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about jobs, resources, and logistics on a scale that would make a modern urban planner break out in a cold sweat. And while these architectural wonders were undoubtedly impressive, they also served as a colossal PR campaign. Each stone laid was a reminder of the pharaoh's divine right to rule and their ability to channel the gods' favor into tangible achievements. Of course, all this construction came at a cost, literally. The state's resources were finite, and funding these mega projects meant taxes, and more taxes. Grain, labor, and materials didn't come cheap, and the burden often fell on the shoulders of the common folk. If you were a peasant, you weren't just working for the next harvest. You were also laboring to ensure the pharaoh's legacy was as solid as the limestone blocks hauled up the Nile. It was a classic case of trickle-up economics, where the glory and prestige of monumental architecture were enjoyed by the elite, while the everyday Egyptian footed the bill. But hey, let's not rain on the pharaoh's parade entirely. These rulers weren't just sitting on golden thrones eating grapes, though, let's be real, they probably did that too. They were the glue holding the sprawling Egyptian civilization together, mediating between the earthly and the divine. Their role was a delicate balancing act, keeping the gods appeased while managing the very human concerns of governance. And in a world where the sun could scorch your crops and the Nile could wash away your village, having a god king on your side wasn't such a bad deal. Yet, despite their divine status, pharaohs were still human, flawed, ambitious, and sometimes downright ruthless. Behind the mask of godhood lay political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli proud. Succession disputes, power struggles, and court intrigues were as much a part of the pharaoh's life as the daily rituals performed in their honor. These were leaders who knew that while their power might be divinely sanctioned, it was maintained through very earthly means. So, while the pharaohs basked in the glow of their celestial connections, they were savvy enough to understand that their legacy depended on both the gods and the people. They were the ultimate showmen, blending spectacle with strategy, ensuring their names echoed through eternity. And as we continue to explore the intricacies of ancient Egyptian society, the pharaohs remain a testament to the power of myth, the allure of divinity, and the very human desire to leave a mark on history. Stick around, because the tale of these enigmatic rulers is far from over. And speaking of legacies, let's dive headfirst into the part of Egyptian culture that's as iconic as the pyramids themselves. the afterlife beliefs. If you thought modern obsessions with immortality were a bit much, just wait until you hear about the ancient Egyptians who turned the quest for eternal life into a full-time job. Welcome to the world of mummification and the Book of the Dead, where death was just the beginning of a very bureaucratic journey. The Egyptians were nothing if not thorough when it came to death. They believed that life after death was more than just lounging around in paradise. It was an eternal continuation of earthly existence. And so, your body needed to be preserved. Enter mummification, the ancient equivalent of a very long-lasting warranty. This wasn't just about wrapping someone up like a human burrito. Oh no, it was an elaborate 70-day process that would make a modern spa day look like a quick shower. First up, the organs. Out with the liver, stomach, lungs and intestines, which were neatly packed into canopic jars that probably had more personality than your average kitchen set. The heart, considered the seat of intelligence and emotion, was left in place, because let's face it, no one wants to arrive in the afterlife without their emotional support organ. The brain, however, was unceremoniously removed through the nose, using a hook. Clearly, the Egyptians had a very different opinion on where human intelligence resided. But it wasn't just about removing the squishy bits. The body was then dried out with natron, a natural salt, before being wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen. The cost of this process wasn't exactly pocket change. For the elite, mummification could cost up to a year's worth of an average laborer's salary. Talk about an investment in one's post-mortem future. These carefully preserved bodies were then tucked away in elaborately decorated tombs, complete with grave goods to make the afterlife as comfortable as possible. We're talking jewelry, food, and even furniture. Some pharaohs took it up a notch, commissioning entire fleets of model boats to navigate the celestial waters. Forget a tiny sailboat. These were the mega-yachts of the ancient world. And then there was the Book of the Dead, a sort of guidebook for the deceased to navigate the hazards of the afterlife. Think of it as an ancient GPS, but instead of turn-by-turn directions to the nearest Starbucks, it provided spells and incantations to ward off demons and pass the dreaded weighing of the heart ceremony. The heart was weighed against a feather representing mad, or truth. If it was lighter, you were in the clear. If not, well, enjoy being devoured by Amit, the part lion, part hippo, part crocodile beast with a serious appetite for the morally deficient. Of course, all this afterlife prep wasn't just for kicks. It was deeply embedded in the Egyptian psyche, a comforting promise that life didn't end at death's door. But here's the twist. How much did your average Egyptian actually buy into this? Was everyone shelling out for deluxe mummification packages, or was this belief system more of a VIP lounge for the wealthy? For the everyday Egyptian, the reality was a bit less glamorous. The average Joe or Jane probably didn't have the cash reserves to splurge on a high-end afterlife experience. Instead, many relied on simpler burials and communal tombs, hoping that their spirit would hitch a ride on the coattails of wealthier compatriots. Grave goods might consist of a few modest offerings, no gilded chariots or gold-encrusted sarcophagi here. And then there's the matter of tomb construction. Sure, the pyramids were marvels of engineering, but they were also economic powerhouses. Building a pyramid wasn't just a matter of stacking stones. It was a massive labor operation that required a workforce of thousands. These workers, contrary to popular myth, weren't slaves, but laborers paid in grain, beer, and sometimes even medical care. The construction of these tombs was a year-round endeavor, with workers rotating in and out like a highly organized ancient construction team. The sheer scale of these projects was both a testament to the pharaoh's power and a drain on resources. It's estimated that building the Great Pyramid of Giza took around 20 years and involved roughly 3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 2, 5, and 15 tons. That's like trying to build a skyscraper using only manpower and primitive tools, a feat as impressive as it is exhausting. And let's not forget the grave robbers, the eternal pests of the afterlife industry. Despite the intricate traps and curses allegedly laid down to deter them, these tombs were often plundered. Turns out that gold and jewels were just as appealing to ancient thieves as they are to modern ones. The romantic vision of an untouched tomb, filled with treasures for eternity, was often just that, a vision. Many tombs were emptied long before archaeologists ever laid eyes on them. All this effort and expense begs the question, why go to such lengths? Perhaps the answer lies in the very human desire for permanence, a way to thumb one's nose at mortality. The Egyptians might not have been able to cheat death, but they sure knew how to dress it up in a fancy outfit and throw it a party. But what about the political and social ramifications? This obsession with the afterlife wasn't just a personal quest, it was a state-sponsored affair. The priesthood, holding the keys to the afterlife, wielded immense power. They were the gatekeepers of eternity, ensuring that the pharaoh's divine favor was secured for the ages. And as with all good things, there was an economic angle. Temples and tombs required funding, and that meant taxes, donations, and sometimes outright demands on the populace. So, while the allure of eternal life was undoubtedly strong, it was also a tool for maintaining social and political order. It reinforced the status quo, keeping the economy humming and the priesthood in power, while ensuring that the pharaoh's legacy was as enduring as the pyramids themselves. In the end, the Egyptian obsession with the afterlife was part romantic dream, part harsh reality. It was a belief system that offered comfort in the face of the unknown, a promise of continuity in a world where life was as fragile as the desert sands. But it was also a pragmatic endeavor, a way to wield power and control in the here and now, ensuring that even in death, the pharaohs would reign supreme. Stay tuned, because the story of Egypt's ancient civilization is far from over, and the sands have many more secrets to reveal. As the grand tapestry of ancient Egyptian civilization began to unravel, the entry of Greek and Roman influences marked a seismic shift, a cultural remix that would have made even the most seasoned DJ envious. Imagine Egypt at this time. A land that had once been the exclusive playground of the gods was suddenly hosting a lively party, with philosophers and emperors crashing through the gates. The Ptolemies, a Greek dynasty, took the throne after Alexander the Great's conquests, and with them came a fusion of Greek and Egyptian traditions that would redefine religious practices. The Ptolemies were nothing if not savvy. They knew that to rule Egypt effectively, they had to appeal to both the native Egyptians and the new Greek settlers. So they embraced the role of pharaohs, adopting the religious customs of their predecessors while infusing them with Hellenistic flair. It was a bit like adding feta cheese to your falafel, unexpected but surprisingly harmonious. Temples continued to flourish, with new ones sprouting up like ancient Starbucks, each trying to outdo the last with a blend of architectural styles. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera, with its grandiose columns and intricate carvings, stands as a testament to this cultural crossover. However, the real showstopper was the cult of Serapis, an invented deity that combined aspects of Greek and Egyptian gods. Serapis was the ultimate diplomatic creation, like a religious smoothie blending Zeus's thunderous charisma with Osiris's underworld mystique. The new god appealed to both Greeks and Egyptians, serving as a bridge between cultures, a divine olive branch, if you will. The cult of Serapis flourished in Alexandria, the cosmopolitan hub of the Mediterranean, where people could worship in style amidst the city's famed library and lighthouse. But while the Greeks were busy blending cultures, the Romans were eyeing Egypt like a hungry diner staring at a 7-course meal. By 30 BCE, they had annexed Egypt, transforming it into the empire's breadbasket. This wasn't just a hostile takeover, it was a full-blown acquisition, with the Romans eager to tap into Egypt's wealth and resources. They loved the grain, but the allure of Egyptian religion was also too tempting to resist. Roman emperors, ever the opportunists, adopted Egyptian iconography, incorporating it into their own imperial cults. Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemies, famously aligned herself with both Egyptian and Roman identities, a move that was as strategic as it was seductive. Yet, even as Roman soldiers marched through ancient temples, the resilience of Egyptian religious traditions was nothing short of remarkable. Like a vintage wine that withstands the test of time, certain aspects of these beliefs lingered on, albeit in new bottles. The worship of Isis, in particular, spread throughout the Roman Empire, with temples dedicated to her popping up as far afield as London and Pompeii. Isis became a goddess of the people, her image gracing everything from coins to frescoes. It seems the Romans couldn't resist a strong, magical woman who could multitask better than any emperor's council. Despite these adaptations, the temples themselves began to crumble under the weight of neglect and changing priorities. Economic pressures, and the shifting sands of political power saw the once mighty spiritual centers fall into disrepair. The clergy, who had wielded immense influence during Egypt's golden age, found their power waning. The priests who once tended to the gods' every need, feeding statues and performing daily rituals, were increasingly sidelined as new religions took root. Christianity, with its message of salvation and eternal life, offered an alternative that resonated with the common folk. The faith spread like wildfire across the Roman Empire, and by the time the Edict of Theodosius came into effect in 300 AD CE, pagan temples were officially out of business. The grand edifices that had once echoed with hymns and incense now stood silent, their guards retreating into the shadows of history. Yet the Egyptian penchant for resurrection proved hard to extinguish completely. Many pagan festivals and rituals were repurposed into Christian celebrations, a sneaky rebranding that ensured the old gods lived on in new guises. As we sift through the sands of time, it's evident that Egyptian religious practices, while officially in decline, left an indelible mark on the world. The fascination with life after death, the veneration of powerful deities, and the architectural marvels they inspired continue to capture our imagination. The pyramids still stand, silent sentinels to a bygone era, drawing tourists and historians alike, eager to unravel their mysteries. The allure of the mummy's curse, the enigma of hieroglyphs, and the grandeur of the pharaohs have seeped into popular culture, from Hollywood blockbusters to video games. And so, as we wrap up our journey through the world of ancient Egyptian religion, we find ourselves caught in its enduring legacy. The myths, the monuments, and the very idea of a civilization striving to conquer death have etched themselves into our collective consciousness. The Egyptians might not have achieved immortality in the way they imagined, but their stories and achievements continue to inspire and intrigue. In the end, they remind us of the timeless human quest for meaning, the struggle against the inevitable, and the power of belief to transcend even the fall of empires. As we bid farewell to the gods of old, we are left with a poignant reminder. History, much like the Nile, is ever flowing, carrying with it the echoes of past civilizations. The stories of the ancients offer us a mirror, reflecting our own hopes, fears, and aspirations. While the gods themselves may have retreated to the annals of myth, their legacy is far from extinct. In a world constantly in flux, their tales offer a touchstone, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations can crumble, yet their spirit endures. So here's to the Egyptians, the original dreamers and doers, whose pyramids continue to rise against the sandy backdrop of history. They've left us with more than just stone monuments. They've gifted us a narrative of resilience, innovation, and the eternal dance between humanity and the divine. Until the next chapter of history unfolds, may we carry these lessons of the past into the future, always seeking to understand the world around us with the same curiosity and wonder as those who once walked the banks of the Nile. In the early 14th century, while Europe was busy with its medieval dramas and the Black Death was just around the corner, West Africa had its own headliner, Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire. Imagine a man so wealthy that his name became synonymous with opulence. Not just wealthy, he was the kind of rich that makes even modern tech billionaires look like they're pinching pennies. Yet, unlike today's well-known moguls, Mansa Musa wasn't tweeting his every thought or buying social media platforms. His wealth was in gold, and he spent it like it was going out of style. Mansa Musa ascended to the throne in 1312, a time when Mali was already a powerhouse, sprawling across parts of what we now call Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, and beyond. The empire was like the Amazon of its day, a trade juggernaut dealing in gold, salt, and ivory. But Musa took things to a whole new level. His accession was a classic case of being in the right place at the right time. His predecessor, Abu Bakr Roman II, supposedly set sail into the Atlantic Ocean with a fleet, never to return. Pro tip: if you're next in line for the throne, hope your predecessor gets ambitious about discovering new lands. Now, Musa wasn't just sitting on a pile of gold coins. He was sitting on a literal mountain of gold. Mali's territory included some of the richest gold mines on the planet. In fact, during Musa's reign, the Mali Empire was accountable for nearly half of the old world's gold. That's not just rich, that's Scrooge McDuck diving into a pool of gold coins kind of rich. And Musa loved to share that wealth. particularly on his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, which we'll dive into later. Spoiler, it involves a lot of camels and a lot of bling. Contemporary accounts of Musa's wealth are so staggering that they sound like the stuff of legend. The 14th century Arab historian Al-Umari wrote that Musa spent so much gold in Cairo on his way to Mecca that he caused a currency crisis. Yes, you heard that right. His generosity tanked the local economy. Imagine rolling into town, throwing money around like confetti, and then leaving with the local currency devalued for a decade. It's the kind of economic impact most billionaires can only dream of. But let's be real for a second. Some of these tales are a touch exaggerated. Chroniclers of the time had a flair for the dramatic, like medieval tabloid writers. While Musa's wealth was undoubtedly immense, the stories have grown with each retelling. Still, even if we cut the hyperbole in half, we're left with a man whose wealth outshone the GDP of entire kingdoms. Of course, wealth on this scale wasn't just about buying cool stuff or showing off. It was a tool for power, diplomacy, and influence. Musa used his riches to build mosques, universities, and libraries, turning Timbuktu into a center of learning and culture. Think of it as the world's most exclusive Ivy League, but with a lot more sand and a lot less snow. This investment in education and culture left a legacy that outlived Musa, making Mali a beacon of knowledge and Islamic scholarship in West Africa. So, while today's billionaires might be launching rockets or buying football teams, Mansa Musa was reshaping the cultural and educational landscape of an entire region. This was a man who knew that true power wasn't just in wealth, but in the ability to use it to create lasting change. That's a lesson some of today's rich could take to heart, don't you think? As we continue to explore Musa's life, we'll separate the myths from reality, revealing a story that's as much about human ambition and generosity as it is about wealth. But for now, remember this. Mansa Musa wasn't just a footnote in history's ledger. He was the headline, the main event, the talk of the 14th century town. And in a world obsessed with wealth, his story still resonates, a testament to the power and peril of being the richest man on earth. And then, in 1324, Mansa Musa decided it was time to hit the road, or the sand dunes, as it were, and embarked on his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca. Forget your typical road trip playlist. This was a 4,000-mile trek that would make a rock band's tour look like a weekend getaway. Picture a caravan so grand that it made the Beverly Hills Christmas parade look like a neighborhood garage sale. We're talking about thousands of soldiers, slaves, heralds, and those all-important camels, each loaded up with gold like they were in a medieval bling contest. Musa wasn't just traveling, he was taking a moving metropolis with him. Now, logistics in the 14th century weren't exactly Amazon Prime ready. Moving a small city across the Sahara Desert required a logistical operation that would make even modern military generals break a sweat. It wasn't just about finding enough camels. It was about ensuring they didn't keel over from exhaustion or, starvation. Musa's entourage was well stocked with provisions, but even then, the journey was no walk in the park. There's no medieval GPS, no gas stations along the way, just vast stretches of sand, and a whole lot of hoping your guide knows his stars from his sand dunes. But why, you may ask, did Musa choose to flaunt his wealth on such an epic scale? Besides the spiritual obligation of the Hajj, Musa had a flair for the dramatic equivalent of medieval Instagram. He knew that his pilgrimage was a golden opportunity, literally, to showcase Mali's wealth to the Islamic world and beyond. His penchant for grand gestures was more than just a vanity project. It was a strategic play to put Mali on the map, quite literally, as European mapmakers would later start including Mali with a little crown icon representing its fabulously rich emperor. And speaking of gold, let's not gloss over the staggering amount that Musa carried. 18 tons of gold, reportedly, enough to buy a small kingdom, or perhaps just a really nice palace with an Olympic-sized pool. This was wealth paraded around with the subtlety of a peacock on a catwalk. Now, being generous with his gold was Musa's thing, which sounds lovely until you realize that this benevolence came with unintended economic side effects. Take Cairo, for instance, where Musa's stopover turned into a financial earthquake. When Musa's caravan rolled into Cairo, the city probably thought it was Christmas, New Year, and the lottery all rolled into one. Musa handed out gold like opera giving away cars. You get gold, you get gold. The result, gold prices plummeted faster than a lead balloon. Imagine a gold market so saturated that it sparked a decade-long recession. Mansa Musa, the only man in history who could bankrupt a city by giving away money. And while Cairo's economy was picking itself up from the floor, Musa's legend was skyrocketing. This pilgrimage wasn't just about leaving a trail of economic mayhem. It was about crafting a narrative. Musa's journey was the medieval equivalent of a viral marketing campaign. As tales of his wealth and generosity spread, so too did Mali's reputation as a global powerhouse. Musa was acutely aware of the power of perception, understanding that legends lived longer than any dynasty. He was crafting a brand, ensuring that his empire was no mere footnote in history, but a headline. Of course, the romanticized version of this journey often skips over the less glamorous details. The heat, the dust, the very real threat of bandits eyeing that gold with less than virtuous intentions. There was no medieval travel insurance, no customer service hotline to call when things went south. It was a perilous undertaking, a test of endurance and leadership that few could have managed. Yet, Musa's successful pilgrimage turned him into a living legend, a figure who could inspire awe from the dusty streets of Cairo to the scholarly halls of Timbuktu. So, while today's billionaires might launch satellites or buy social networks, Musa was out there buying respect, influence, and a spot in the annals of history. He used his journey as a tool of diplomacy, a means to forge ties with the Islamic world and showcase Mali's prosperity. The pilgrimage to Mecca was more than a religious obligation. It was a chess move on the geopolitical board, a bold statement that put Mali and its emperor on the global stage. And yet, beneath the glamour and gold, there was a man who understood the power of wealth not just as a means to an end, but as a tool for cultural and intellectual expansion. Musa's investments in education and infrastructure back home were as much a part of his legacy as the gold he so freely distributed. But we'll dive into that later, as the journey of Mansa Musa is far from over, and his impact on history continues to echo long after the last camel returned from Mecca. While the last camel may have trudged back to Timbuktu with sand in its hooves, Mansa Musa's legacy was just beginning to settle like gold dust over the Sahara. Once the fanfare and camels had cleared, Musa rolled up his sleeves and got down to the business of empire building. You see, being fabulously wealthy isn't just about glittering parades. It's about ensuring your empire doesn't crumble faster than a sandcastle in a desert breeze. Musa's political and economic strategy was the kind of three-dimensional chess that would make even the most seasoned strategist sweat. First off, he wasn't just sitting on that mountain of gold. He was mining it for all it was worth, literally and metaphorically. Mali's gold trade was the economic engine that powered the empire. But here's the kicker. Musa's brilliance lay in his ability to turn that gold into geopolitical clout. By establishing diplomatic ties with distant lands, he wasn't just expanding Mali's influence, he was ensuring its security. Imagine negotiating with a gold-plated handshake. It's hard to say no when the handshake itself could fund a small army. And speaking of armies, Musa understood that an empire without defense is like a camel without a hump, pretty much useless. While he was no warmonger, he recognized the value of a well-oiled military machine. His forces were the insurance policy for his trade routes, ensuring that gold, salt, and ivory flowed smoothly across the Sahara. It was a delicate balance of power and commerce, a blend of strength and strategy that kept Mali at the top of the African food chain. But Musa wasn't just about soldiers and merchants. He was also a sucker for scholarship. His efforts to promote education and Islam were as legendary as his wealth. Timbuktu became the intellectual equivalent of Silicon Valley, if Silicon Valley had more sand and fewer tech bros. Musa poured resources into building mosques and universities, attracting scholars from across the Islamic world. His most famous project, the Jingreba Mosque, was constructed in 1327. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was a beacon of learning, a lighthouse in the desert drawing in the brightest minds. And let's not forget the University of Sankore, which became the Oxford of the Sahara. The curriculum was as diverse as it was advanced, covering subjects from theology to astronomy. Timbuktu's libraries were overflowing with manuscripts, a testament to Musa's commitment to intellectual growth. In a world where knowledge was power, Musa was building an empire of both. But let's pump the brakes on this rosy picture for a moment. While Musa's cultural patronage has been romanticized more than a Shakespearean sonnet, the reality was a bit more transactional. Yes, Musa was generous, but was it all altruism? Not quite. His investments in education and Islam served a dual purpose. They weren't just about cultural enlightenment, they were about consolidating power. By aligning Mali with the Islamic world, Musa was embedding his empire within a larger geopolitical narrative. It was a calculated move, ensuring Mali's place on the international stage and reinforcing his own legitimacy as a ruler. And speaking of calculations, let's address the myth of Musa's benevolence. Sure, he was generous with his gold, but this wasn't some medieval version of a billionaire giving away fortunes for the love of humanity. Musa's largesse was strategic. By doling out gold to scholars and builders, he was buying influence and loyalty. It was a savvy investment, ensuring that both his subjects and his scholars were singing his praises, or at least chanting them in the halls of Timbuktu's great learning centers. Yet there's no denying the allure of the legend. The romantic image of Mansa Musa as a benevolent patron of the arts is a hard one to shake. But beneath the gilded surface was a man acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. His cultural patronage wasn't just about leaving a legacy. It was about securing his empire's future in a world where alliances could shift as quickly as the desert sands. And let's not ignore the empire's administration, which was as complex as a medieval tax code. Musa knew that a great empire ran on more than just gold and goodwill. His administration was a finely tuned machine, with governors and officials ensuring that the empire's vast territories were well managed, and more importantly, well taxed. It was a bureaucratic marvel, a system that kept the gears of the empire turning smoothly. This wasn't some haphazard collection of territories. It was an empire with structure, order, and efficiency. Now, you might think that all this makes Mansa Musa sound more like a shrewd CEO than a magnanimous ruler, and you'd be spot on. His political and economic strategies were like a masterclass in empire management, a blend of charisma, cunning, and capital that kept Mali at the forefront of the medieval world. Musa's empire wasn't just a collection of gold mines and trade routes. It was a carefully crafted narrative, a story of power and prosperity that resonated far beyond the borders of Africa. But remember, this tale of opulence and strategy is far from over. Mansa Musa's story isn't just about wealth and power. It's about the human ambition that fuels empires and the legacies they leave behind. As we continue to unravel the threads of his life, we'll see how Musa's influence extended beyond his reign, shaping the course of history in ways that are still felt today. So stay tuned, because there's plenty more to discover about this gold-laden legend and his enduring impact on the world stage. And speaking of human ambition, let's fast forward to after Mansa Musa took his final bow in 1337, leaving behind an empire as glittering as the gold mines it sat upon. Now, you'd think that the world's richest empire would just keep cruising along the prosperity highway, right? Well, not quite. The wheels started wobbling almost as soon as Musa's golden sandals were hung up for good. Enter the succession game, a medieval version of musical chairs, minus the music, and with way more at stake than just a seat. Musa's son, Maganai, was next in line, but let's just say he didn't inherit his father's knack for empire management. Magan's reign was akin to handing the keys of a Ferrari to someone who's only ever driven a donkey cart. Sure, he had the title, but the political savvy, not so much. Under Magan, the Mali Empire began to show cracks, like a once great mansion starting to sag under the weight of neglect. The administrative prowess that Musa had painstakingly built up was slowly eroding, and the empire's once gleaming trade networks started to rust. It was a slow-motion fizzle, the kind of decline that's less a dramatic fall and more a gradual sinking into the sands of time. But wait, there's more. Magan wasn't the only heir to the throne. The royal family tree was more tangled than a headphone cable in your pocket. With half-brothers and cousins eyeing the throne like it was the last slice of pizza, the imperial court turned into a scene from a medieval reality show. Power struggles erupted like geysers, and the once unified empire began to fracture. Now, here's a plot twist worthy of any epic saga. The Mali Empire's fragmentation wasn't just an internal affair. External pressures started mounting, too. Neighboring kingdoms, smelling blood in the water, began nibbling away at Mali's edges. It was a geopolitical feeding frenzy with the empire as the main course. The Songhai Empire, in particular, was eyeing Timbuktu like a cat stalking a canary, and it wasn't long before they made their move, eventually taking over the city in the late 15th century. So here we are, with the once mighty Mali Empire starting to look more like a patchwork quilt than a unified kingdom. Yet, despite its decline, the legend of Musa continued to shine brighter than a supernova. His wealth and grandeur became the stuff of legend, a gold-plated fairy tale that outlived the gritty reality of succession skirmishes and economic downturns. The romanticized image of Mali's golden age persisted, thanks in no small part to the allure of Musa's pilgrimage and the tales spun by European mapmakers and writers. You see, while the empire was fragmenting, the legend was solidifying. Mansa Musa was becoming a mythic figure, an icon of African prosperity, and a symbol of wealth that transcended borders and centuries. But let's peel back the gilded veneer for a moment. The truth is that while Mansa Musa's wealth was undeniably vast, the romanticized narrative often glosses over the harsh realities of maintaining such an empire. The logistics of managing an empire that stretched over 2 million square kilometers were daunting, to say the least. Communication was slow, and dissent could fester in the far corners of the realm before word even reached the capital. It wasn't just about having gold, it was about having control, and that's where things got tricky. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, Mansa Musa's story is a testament to the dual nature of wealth, its power to elevate and its propensity to complicate. The romantic image of a wealthy, benevolent ruler spreading riches and enlightenment is certainly appealing, but it's only half the story. The reality was a delicate balancing act of power, politics, and a touch of good old-fashioned luck. As we continue to unravel the threads of this story, keep in mind that the echoes of Mansa Musa's reign and the fall of his empire are still felt today. His life was a blend of human ambition and the harsh realities of empire building, a saga that reminds us of the eternal dance between power and legacy. But don't put away your historical dance shoes just yet. There's more to come in this epic tale of wealth, power, and the sands of time. So stay tuned as we continue to explore the legacy of Africa's wealthiest emperor and the empire he left behind. So, as the dust settled on Mansa Musa's reign, his legend was just getting started. Welcome to the renaissance of the myth, where medieval maps started featuring Musa like a rock star with a crown. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, for instance, etched his image into posterity. A golden king holding an orb of gold, smack dab in the middle of Africa. It was like the medieval version of a viral meme, spreading the word of his wealth faster than a camel can cross the Sahara. Maps back then were less about geographic accuracy and more about storytelling. They were the Instagram of the Middle Ages, showcasing highlights and hearsay in equal measure. The depiction of Musa wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a geopolitical statement. Europeans were getting wind of the vast riches to be found in Africa, and Musa's portrayal as the richest man in the world was both a tantalizing prospect and a reminder of Africa's wealth. It was like a medieval treasure map, minus the dotted line and X marks the spot. Fast forward a few centuries, and Mansa Musa's legend has hardly gathered dust. In modern times, his name pops up in places you might not expect. From pop culture references in rap lyrics to documentaries and books, Mansa Musa's story continues to capture the imagination. Jay-Z even gave him a shout-out, likening his own financial success to that of the legendary king. It's not hard to see why artists and storytellers are drawn to Musa. His life reads like a rags-to-riches tale turned up to 11. It's a narrative that appeals to our fascination with wealth, power, and the sheer audacity of one man's impact on history. But let's pump the brakes on this romantic ride and get back to the gritty reality. Mansa Musa's story, while endlessly fascinating, is also a cautionary tale about the power of narrative. His wealth and the stories surrounding it have been exaggerated over time, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. The truth is, while Musa was undoubtedly rich, the accounts of his wealth often skip over the economic complexities and the eventual decline of his empire. It's a classic case of the myth overshadowing the man, a phenomenon as old as storytelling itself. And therein lies the lesson. Historical narratives, much like those medieval maps, are often shaped by the tales we choose to tell. They reflect not just the reality of the past, but also the aspirations, fears, and prejudices of those who recount them. Musa's story is a testament to the enduring power of myth, a reminder that the stories we tell can outlive the realities they were based on. It's a narrative that's been repackaged and retold through the ages, each iteration adding a new layer of intrigue and allure. What's particularly fascinating is how Mansa Musa's story challenges our modern perceptions of wealth and power. In a world where billionaires are often scrutinized for their philanthropy, or lack thereof, Musa's tale is a study in contrasts. His extravagant displays of wealth were both a diplomatic tool and an economic pitfall, a duality that resonates with today's discussions about wealth distribution and influence. It makes you wonder, in the age of instant information, would Musa's story have played out differently? So, as we wrap up this historical journey, let's take stock of what Mansa Musa's life teaches us. His legacy is a multifaceted gem, reflecting the complexities of power, wealth, and human ambition. It's a story that reminds us of the delicate dance between narrative and reality, a dance that continues to shape how we perceive history and its key players. As we look back on Mansa Musa, it's clear that his impact was as much about the stories spun in his wake as the gold he dispersed. And in a world where the past often informs the present, his tale is a reminder of the enduring power of narrative to shape our understanding of history and ourselves. So there you have it, folks. Mansa Musa, the man, the myth, the legend. A figure whose life was as layered as the sands of the Sahara, leaving an indelible mark on both history and the stories we tell about it. As we close the book on this chapter, remember that history is more than dates and figures. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience, myth, and the enduring quest for legacy. And in that tapestry, Mansa Musa stands out in gold. Your eyes flutter open to the soft glow filtering through the cracks of your mud brick home. It's a sturdy little structure, built with your own 2 hands. Well, and the hands of half your village, because let's be honest, construction in 7000 BCE is a team sport. These bricks, made from a mix of mud and straw, are the original eco-friendly building materials, long before anyone started marketing bamboo toothbrushes. Your walls are thick enough to keep out the chill, but still let in a breeze strong enough to carry the scent of wet earth and livestock. Ah, the perfume of progress. As you stretch out on your woven reed mat, you contemplate the layout of your village. It's not exactly a bustling metropolis, more like a cozy cul-de-sac with ambitions. A couple of dozen houses, all huddled together for warmth, safety, and the occasional neighborhood gossip. There's a communal area where everyone gathers for the village equivalent of a town hall meeting, which usually ends up being a heated debate over who snagged the best stone axe from the last batch. Speaking of axes, let's talk tools. Yours are made of flint and bone, the cutting-edge tech of your day, pun fully intended. Flint is your go-to material because it's as reliable as a Neolithic sunrise, which is to say, pretty darn reliable. These tools are your lifeline for everything from hunting to harvesting to defending your precious grain stash from the occasional marauding neighbor. You've even heard of villages that are experimenting with obsidian for its razor-sharp edges, but that's more of a luxury item. You're sticking with flint for now. Call it the Toyota Corolla of the Stone Age. Now, it's time to face the day. The division of labor in your village is as clear-cut as a freshly knapped flint blade. Men and women both have their roles, though not necessarily as rigid as you might think. Sure, men are often the hunters and women the gatherers, but there's plenty of overlap. Some days you're out in the field sowing crops, and other days you might be tasked with making pottery or weaving textiles. It's a flexible system, designed to get the most out of each day's sunlight. And you do all of this in about 6 to 8 hours a day. Take that, modern 9 to 5. As you head out of your house, you pass a neighbor already busy at work weaving baskets. It's a skill that takes patience and dexterity, and let's be honest, a lot of time. But then again, you're not exactly scrolling through TikTok, so there's plenty of time to perfect your craft. The materials are all locally sourced. Willow, reeds, grasses, and the baskets are as much a status symbol as they are a practical necessity. You've got your eye on a particularly elaborate design that involves dyeing the reeds with natural pigments. Who knew basket weaving could be so avant-garde? Walking through your village, you can't help but notice the animals that have become an integral part of your daily life. Domesticated goats and sheep wander around, providing you with milk, wool, and the occasional dinner if they're not pulling their weight. These animals are like your prehistoric Roombas, cleaning up the scraps and providing you with a little extra warmth on cold nights. You make a mental note to thank your ancestors for this early innovation in sustainable living. Farming is the backbone of your existence, and your village is a hive of agricultural activity. The fields are planted with emmer wheat and barley, both staples in your diet. You've got legumes, too, lentils and peas, adding some much-needed variety to your meals. The plough hasn't been invented yet, but you make do with digging sticks and stone hoes. It's back-breaking work, sure, but nothing beats the satisfaction of seeing those first green shoots poking through the soil. It's like watching your very own food delivery service come to life, albeit a very slow one. You take a moment to appreciate the early innovations in textiles. The loom is a recent addition to your village, and it's revolutionizing how you make clothes. Before this, you were working with nettles and flax, but now you're experimenting with wool from your sheep. Spinning and weaving have become communal activities, with everyone pitching in to create garments that are both functional and, dare you say, fashionable. You've even started trading some of your excess fabric with neighboring villages, creating a rudimentary economy based on the barter system. Ah, the joys of pre-currency commerce. As the sun climbs higher, you're reminded of the social structures that keep your community ticking. There's no king or queen here, no grand palaces or gilded thrones. Instead, you have elders and shamans, those wise enough to guide you through both daily life and the occasional existential crisis. Decisions are made collectively, though not without a fair share of debate. Everyone has a say, and while it can sometimes feel like herding cats, it ensures that no one goes unheard. It's democracy in its earliest form, messy, loud, and beautifully human. By midday, you've already accomplished more than you might in a week of modern life. Your hands are calloused, your muscles sore, but there's a satisfaction in knowing that your work has a direct impact on your survival. There's no disconnect between you and the fruits of your labor, literally. As you take a break to enjoy a simple meal of bread and cheese, you're surrounded by the tangible results of your effort. You've earned this rest, and it tastes all the sweeter because of it. In the afternoon, you gather with others to share stories and knowledge. Oral tradition is your version of the internet, a vast web of tales and teachings passed down through generations. You hear stories of great hunts, of harsh winters survived, and of the occasional supernatural occurrence. These narratives are more than entertainment. They're a way of preserving your history and culture in a world where nothing is written down. It's a living legacy, one that ties you to your ancestors and future descendants. As the day winds down, you head back to your home, taking in the sights and sounds of your village. The air is cooling, the sky a canvas of reds and oranges as the sun sets. You've come to appreciate the rhythm of life in your Neolithic settlement, a balance between work and rest, community and individuality. You may not have the luxuries of modern life, but you've got something arguably more valuable, a deep connection to the land, to your community, and to the very essence of what it means to be human. And as you settle down for a well-earned rest, you can't help but feel a profound sense of belonging. As the glow of the setting sun retreats behind the hills, you find yourself reflecting on the rhythm of life in your Neolithic community. The idea of a sunset might sound romantic, but let's not forget that this is also nature's curfew. No streetlights or smartphones to guide your way once darkness falls. But before the day fully slips away, let's dig into the nuts and bolts of your morning routine. Because when the rooster crows, or whatever the Neolithic equivalent is, you need to hit the ground running, quite literally. Your day kicks off with the sound of livestock stirring, a natural alarm clock that doesn't come with a snooze button. Sheep and goats are your four-legged partners in this early civilization gig. They're more than just fluffy distractions. They're integral to your survival strategy. Sheep provide wool for those avant-garde textiles I mentioned, and goats, well, they're your dairy department, offering milk that you can transform into cheese, a culinary invention that's been around longer than your grandma's secret apple pie recipe. Now, onto the real stars of your agricultural show, barley and emmer wheat. These ancient grains are your bread and butter, quite literally. Barley is versatile, showing up in everything from bread to a proto-beer that might not win any craft awards today, but was a hit back then. Emmer wheat, on the other hand, is a bit of a diva with its hard-to-remove husk, but it's a resilient crop that's been feeding folks since around 10,000 BCE. Take that, quinoa. But farming isn't just about planting seeds and hoping for the best. Neolithic farmers were surprisingly sophisticated. Without the benefit of a John Deere tractor, you rely on tools like digging sticks and stone hoes. These are your heavy artillery in the war against hunger, and their simplicity is deceptive. You see, the real magic lies in crop rotation, a concept that, when executed properly, can keep your soil fertile for years. That's right, folks. Neolithic farmers were essentially the first agricultural strategists, long before anyone thought to write a self-help book on the subject. With crops firmly rooted in the ground, it's time to tackle one of the more labor-intensive parts of your day, grinding grains into flour. This is where your upper body strength gets tested, and you might wish you had a Neolithic gym membership. You're using a saddle quern, a two-piece tool that involves a lot of elbow grease. It's the cross-fit of the Stone Age, minus the motivational quotes. And while it's easy to romanticize the idea of baking bread from scratch, let's not kid ourselves. This is hard work. Flour doesn't just magically appear. It's the product of hours of grinding, sifting, and cursing under your breath. Who knew carbs could be so elusive? Despite the toil, there's a reward in the form of fresh bread, a luxury that adds a bit of joy to your otherwise minimalist diet. The bread might be coarse by modern standards, but it's filling, and more importantly, made by your own two hands. Plus, it's a staple that you can trade with other villages, adding a pinch of economic savvy to your daily grind, pun fully intended. Now, let's talk about the social dynamics that underpin this agricultural hustle. Your community isn't just a random collection of people. It's an intricate web of relationships and responsibilities. Everyone plays a part, from the littlest child learning to weave to the elders who pass down agricultural techniques and social wisdom. It's a collective effort, a reminder that you're part of something bigger than yourself. This isn't just survival, it's civilization with all its complexities and contradictions. And while we're on the topic of civilization, let's bust a myth or two. The romanticized notion of the noble savage, the idea that early societies were idyllic paradises where everyone lived in harmony with nature, is just a tad oversimplified. Sure, there's a certain allure to the simplicity of Neolithic life, but don't be fooled. Your ancestors faced challenges ranging from crop failures to disputes over resources. There were no UN peacekeepers to mediate tensions. You relied on diplomacy or, failing that, the business end of a flint axe. Yet, despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, your community thrives. The shared experiences forge bonds that transcend individual hardships. You're not just planting seeds in the ground. You're planting the seeds of human connection, collaboration, and culture. And as you grind grains, milk goats, and weave textiles, you're also weaving the fabric of society, one thread at a time. As the evening settles in, you gather with others around a communal fire. It's a chance to share stories, exchange knowledge, and maybe, just maybe, indulge in that proto-beer I mentioned earlier. This isn't just a way to unwind. It's a vital part of your community's social fabric. Oral traditions are your internet, your library, your Netflix all rolled into one. They preserve your history and create a sense of continuity that will carry forward into future generations. So, as the embers glow and the stars emerge, you can't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. You're part of a grand experiment, a living testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Sure, you don't have the luxuries of modern life, but you've got something arguably more valuable. A deep connection to your community, your land, and the very essence of what it means to be human. And as you settle down for a well-earned rest, you can't help but feel a profound sense of belonging, knowing that tomorrow brings another day in this remarkable journey of early civilization. So, as you drift off under the Neolithic night sky, let's fast forward to the midday meal. A moment that's less about Instagrammable avocado toast and more about the gritty realities of subsistence living. Your Neolithic diet is a highlight reel of what the land offers, and trade practices are the behind-the-scenes logistics that make it all happen. First up, let's talk about what's on your plate. Bread from emmer wheat, maybe some lentil stew, and if you're lucky, a slice of cheese. It's not exactly a Michelin-starred affair, but it's fuel for the afternoon's work. These staples, while humble, are the foundation of your diet. You're not counting calories, thank goodness, but you are acutely aware that every morsel is hard-earned. Now, enter the unsung hero of your culinary story, salt. The white gold of the ancient world, it's essential not only for flavor, but also for preserving food. Salt doesn't just fall from the sky. It's a traded commodity, often sourced from coastal areas or salty inland lakes. Picture this. Small lumps of salt are exchanged like precious gems, a testament to how interconnected even these early societies were. Speaking of trade, let's debunk the myth of the solitary caveman while we're here. The idea that Neolithic folks were isolated hermits is about as accurate as thinking Jurassic Park was a documentary. In reality, trade networks crisscross the map like a spiderweb of human ingenuity. You've got obsidian from Anatolia, shelled jewelry from distant shores, and pottery styles that migrate faster than the latest TikTok dance craze. Obsidian, for instance, is the sharp-edged superstar of tool-making. It's volcanic glass, smooth and sharp enough to make modern surgeons weep with envy. Yet, it isn't just lying around everywhere. No, it's trekked across hundreds of kilometers, exchanged hand-to-hand in a relay of barter and trade. This isn't just commerce. It's the prehistoric version of globalization, long before anyone coined the term. And then there's pottery, the Tupperware of the Neolithic era. These vessels are more than just practical. They're a canvas for artistic expression. Styles vary, with intricate designs that tell tales of cultural exchange. Imagine a pot that's traveled from one village to another, its patterns evolving like a game of telephone. Each piece is a snapshot of connections stretching over vast distances, conveying stories as surely as any written language. Trade routes are the arteries of your society, pumping life and resources from one village to another. You might not have the Silk Road yet, but paths wind through forests and over hills, marked by the footsteps of countless traders. These routes are as vital as your own bloodstream, linking communities in a dance of give and take. But it's not just goods that travel. Ideas hitch a ride, too. Techniques for tool making, new agricultural practices, and even cultural rituals spread along these routes. It's like your Neolithic version of a TED talk circuit, without the PowerPoint presentations. Innovations move at the speed of foot traffic, but they move, creating a dynamic tapestry of human progress. In this web of trade, every village is a node, and every person a potential link in the chain. You're part of a grand experiment in cooperation, where the success of your community hinges on its ability to connect and adapt. Solitary? Hardly. You're as plugged into the Neolithic network as your modern counterpart is to Wi-Fi. In this world, social bonds are currency, and alliances are forged over shared meals and mutual benefit. Trust is the glue that holds it all together, fragile yet resilient, much like the pottery traded across lands. One wrong move can shatter it, but when nurtured, it strengthens the fabric of society. And while we're on the topic of shattered illusions, let's address the romantic notion that these societies were peaceful utopias. Sure, there's a lot of cooperation, but competition is just as fierce. Resources are limited, and disputes over territory or trade routes can lead to conflict. There are no Geneva Conventions to keep things civilized. Disputes are settled in ways that are, shall we say, decidedly non-diplomatic. Yet this ebb and flow of cooperation and conflict is what propels human society forward. It's messy, chaotic, and beautifully complex. Each trade, each meal shared, and each story told around the fire is a thread in the grand tapestry of human history. It's not perfect, but it's profoundly human. So, as you sit down for your midday meal, take a moment to appreciate the intricate web of relationships that make it possible. Your bread is more than just sustenance. It's a testament to the interconnectedness of your world. Your cheese and lentils are not just food. They're the fruits of trade and collaboration. And as you savor each bite, remember that you're part of something much larger, a network of communities that stretches across the land, bound together by necessity, ingenuity, and the timeless human drive to connect. And with that, the afternoon beckons. There's more work to be done, more stories to share, and more connections to forge. As the day wears on, you'll find yourself once again at the center of this remarkable experiment in early civilization. But that, my friend, is a tale for another time. So, as the afternoon sun dips toward the horizon, casting long shadows across your Neolithic settlement. You're drawn to the communal area for a bit of that primeval R&R. Forget Netflix. Your entertainment comes in the form of communal gatherings that could put any modern block party to shame. Here, in this earthy amphitheater, the villagers assemble for rituals and revelries that blend the sacred with the social in a way that only Stone Age societies could master. Picture this: a circle of stone, wood, or simply well-trodden earth, filled with the buzz of anticipation. This is where you come to let your hair down, or perhaps bind it up, depending on the latest Neolithic fashion. Join in music and dance, and participate in rituals that connect you to something larger than yourself. A community, a tradition, maybe even the cosmos. The music, well, it's not exactly Spotify's hardest playlist, but those bone flutes and animal skin drums get the job done, echoing the rhythm of life itself. These gatherings serve as a reminder that for our ancestors, spirituality wasn't confined to grand cathedrals or solemn sermons. It was woven into the fabric of daily life as seamlessly as those baskets you've been eyeing. Participation is a form of social glue, binding you to your community and your ancestors in a timeless dance. Now, let's debunk a myth or two about these gatherings. The romantic image of the noble savage, living in unspoiled harmony with nature, oversimplifies the complexity of Neolithic spiritual life. Sure, there's an element of nature worship, but it's not all moonlit dances and tree-hugging. Spirituality is practical too. It's about appeasing the forces you believe control your harvests and health, which, let's face it, is pretty crucial when your grocery store is a field of emmer wheat. Speaking of spiritual beliefs, let's chat about the OG megalithic wonders, Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe. These sites are the architectural equivalent of a Neolithic mic drop, and they raise more questions than your average toddler. Why did people go to such lengths to haul massive stones across the landscape? It's not like they had cranes or even wheels, just sheer determination and probably a fair amount of sore backs. Stonehenge, for instance, is a circle of standing stones located in Wiltshire, England, and it dates back to around 2500 BCE. But what purpose did it serve? Was it an astronomical calendar, a temple to ancient deities, or perhaps the world's first rock concert venue? The truth is, we don't know for sure, and that's part of its enduring allure. What we do know is that constructing such a site required a level of organization and social cooperation that speaks volumes about the priorities of Neolithic societies. And then there's Göbekli Tepe, located in modern-day Turkey, which predates Stonehenge by several millennia, dating back to around 9600 BCE. These stone circles and pillars are adorned with intricate carvings depicting animals and abstract symbols. Was it a temple, social hub, or an ancient observatory? Again, the jury's out. But what's clear is that these structures suggest a complex society with sophisticated beliefs and the social cohesion to construct monumental architecture. These sites reveal a culture deeply invested in the spiritual and the symbolic. They're a testament to the Neolithic mind's capacity for abstraction and planning, a reminder that our ancestors weren't just surviving, they were thriving, creating art, and pondering the mysteries of existence, much like we do today. Burial practices offer another window into the Neolithic soul. Forget sterile cemeteries with neat rows of headstones. Burials back then were intimate affairs, often within the confines of the settlement itself. Bodies were interred with care, accompanied by grave goods like pottery, tools, and ornaments. This wasn't just about laying someone to rest. It was a statement about their status, their role in life, and their passage into whatever lay beyond. These practices hint at a belief in an afterlife, a continuation of existence that transcends the physical. But here's a dose of reality. The grave goods also reflect the social structure of the living. They're as much about earthly status as they are about spiritual beliefs. Who gets buried with what speaks volumes about social hierarchy and the value placed on certain roles? And let's not forget the economic angle. Building megalithic structures or organizing a burial isn't just a spiritual endeavor. It's a logistical challenge that requires resources, time, and labor. It's an investment, a commitment of community effort that speaks to the priorities and capabilities of the society. As the afternoon light fades, casting a golden hue over your village, you're reminded that these gatherings and rituals are more than just relics of a bygone era. They're a living legacy, echoing the human quest for meaning and connection that continues to this day. You're part of a grand tapestry of human history, one that weaves together the practical and the mystical, the individual and the communal. So, as you join the circle and the music swells, think of it as your Neolithic version of a TED talk, a chance to explore the big ideas and deep questions that have driven humanity from the Stone Age to the Information Age. It's a reminder that while the tools and technologies may have changed, the essence of what it means to be human, the quest for connection, understanding, and belonging, remains timeless. And with that, you lose yourself in the rhythm, feeling the pulse of a history that's as alive today as it was millennia ago. As the music fades and the last echoes of laughter hang in the cool night air, let's delve into the technological wizardry that made the Neolithic era a real game changer. By now, you've got a good grasp of the daily grind in your village, but what about those inventions that set the stage for all of modern civilization? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about flint axes and catchy drum beats. First, let's chat about pottery, the original art form that combined utility with aesthetics. Neolithic folks didn't just make parts, they made statements. This wasn't just about having something to store your lentils in. It was the dawn of craftsmanship that would eventually lead to everything from Ming vases to IKEA mugs. Early pottery techniques, dating back to around 10,000 BCE, involved hand-building methods like coiling and pinching. It was a bit like playing with Play-Doh, except your life might depend on whether that clay part could hold water without leaking. These parts were often fired in simple open pits, reaching temperatures of about 800-900 degrees Celsius, a far cry from your modern-day kiln, but effective nonetheless. The designs were not just decorative. They were a form of communication, with patterns and symbols indicating cultural identity and even possibly trade routes. Pottery shards found in archaeological sites can be as informative as a time machine, offering insights into trade networks and cultural exchanges. While it may not sound as thrilling as a Hollywood blockbuster, pottery was the Neolithic equivalent of a viral trend, spreading from the Middle East to Europe like wildfire, or in this case, like a well-tended hearth. Now, let's roll over to one of the most revolutionary inventions ever, the wheel. Around 3500 BCE, some brilliant Neolithic mind looked at a log and thought, hey, what if we used this for more than just firewood? And thus, the wheel was born, not as part of a Roman chariot, but more humbly as a potter's wheel. Initially, it was a simple wooden disc, about the size of a large pizza, which artisans would spin to shape their clay. This was the first step towards a technological leap that would eventually lead to, well, everything from bicycles to Mars rovers. The wheel's journey from pottery tool to transportation marvel wasn't exactly overnight. It took a few centuries, and some serious lateral thinking, for someone to figure out that attaching wheels to a platform could revolutionize how goods and people were moved. This innovation paved the way for carts and wagons, fundamentally altering trade and travel. And while it didn't come with a GPS or shock absorbers, it was a seismic shift in human capability, a reminder that sometimes the simplest ideas have the most profound impacts. As the evening deepens, let's not forget the role of textiles in this saga of innovation. The invention of the loom around 5000 BCE transformed the way fabrics were produced, allowing for more intricate designs and efficient production. Before this, clothing was a laborious affair, spun and woven by hand in a process that could make knitting a sweater seem like a breeze. With the loom, your village could produce textiles that were not only functional, but also a form of expression and trade currency. These weren't just clothes, they were the threads that wove together communities and economies. Speaking of economies, let's put a pin in the myth of the primitive barter system. Sure, you weren't trading stocks or swiping credit cards, but the barter system was sophisticated in its own right. Villages engaged in complex exchanges, trading excess grain for pottery, textiles, or even livestock. This was more than just swapping goods. It was the foundation of an economic system that required trust, negotiation, and a keen sense of value. The concept of credit may not have involved interest rates, but it did require a reputation for fairness and reliability. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion that Neolithic life was a monotonous march of survival. Yes, life was tough. And yes, you didn't have Netflix to unwind, But the Neolithic era was a hotbed of creativity and innovation. These ancient pioneers didn't just survive, they thrived, laying the groundwork for future civilizations to build upon. They weren't just making do, they were making history. As the stars twinkle above, let's reflect on the legacy of these early innovators. The romanticized image of Neolithic life often overlooks the sheer grit and ingenuity it took to carve out an existence in a world where nature was both a benevolent provider and a merciless adversary. These were people who looked at a landscape of challenges and saw opportunities for growth and development. They took clay and made it a canvas, wood, and made it a wheel, wool, and made it a tapestry. They were the original disruptors, the Silicon Valley startup of their time, minus the caffeine-fueled hackathons and stark options. In conclusion, the Neolithic period wasn't just a stepping stone to the Bronze Age. It was a cornerstone of human civilization. The technological advances that emerged from this era, pottery, the wheel, textiles, weren't just tools. They were catalysts for change, enabling societies to evolve from small, self-sufficient communities into interconnected networks of trade and culture. They remind us that innovation isn't just about the latest gadget or app. It's about the relentless pursuit of solutions to life's challenges, a pursuit that's as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. So, as you drift into a well-deserved sleep under the Neolithic night sky, think of those early pioneers who, with nothing more than their hands, their wits, and a bit of fire, set humanity on a path toward the future. They didn't have the luxuries we take for granted, but they had something perhaps even more valuable: the drive to innovate, to connect, and to create a legacy that would echo through the ages. And as you close your eyes, remember that you're part of this grand human story, one that began in the flickering light of a communal fire and continues in the glow of your smartphone screen. Sweet dreams, my Neolithic adventurer. If Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's early life were a novel, it might have been titled The Adventures of the Rebellious Cadet with a Passion for Turtlenecks. Born in 1881 in Thessaloniki, then part of the Ottoman Empire, Mustafa Kemal wasn't exactly your average Ottoman kid with a knack for obedience. His father, Ali Reza, a timber trader, and his mother, Zubid, had high hopes for their son, steering him towards a path of education rather than the raucous allure of the streets. Little did they know, young Mustafa was destined to rewrite history while darning some seriously questionable fashion choices. As a child, Mustafa was sent to a traditional religious school, an imam had it, designed to churn out respectable citizens for an empire on the brink of collapse. But Mustafa, ever the skeptic, apparently decided that the school's curriculum was just a bit too, let's say, divine for his taste. His father, wise to his son's restlessness, whisked him away to a more secular school. This decision was less about divine intervention and more about practical survival in a world where the Ottoman Empire was showing more cracks than an overbaked ceramic vase. By the time Mustafa hit his teens, he was ready for military school. Here, he would learn the fine art of war, and more importantly, how to sport a uniform with a confidence that would later rival even the most daring of fashion icons. Let's be honest, any teenage boy who can pull off a fez without looking like he's trying too hard is one to watch. This was where Mustafa earned his middle name, Kemal, meaning perfection or maturity in Arabic, a nickname that would stick with him, even if perfection in teenage boys usually amounts to remembering to change socks every day. Military school, young Kemal stood out like a neon sign in a blackout. He excelled in mathematics, a subject that requires more logic than luck, and was known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Mustafa's teachers quickly learned that engaging with him in a battle of wits was akin to bringing a knife to a gunfight. Yet, even as a stellar student, Mustafa had a rebellious streak. Legend has it that he once faced disciplinary action not for insubordination, but for introducing new ideas in a school where tradition was more valuable than innovation. Imagine trying to pitch Netflix to a room full of die-hard VHS collectors. Mustafa was all about the new and the now. Fast forward to his military academy days in Istanbul, where Mustafa's education took a turn for the unpredictable. Istanbul, the city of sultans and baklava, was a melting pot of ideas and revolutionaries, a place where a young man could absorb more than just military strategy. Here, Mustafa honed his leadership skills, and developed his vision for a modern, secular Turkey, all while still finding time to perfect his signature mustache, a must-have accessory for any aspiring revolutionary of the early 20th century. But let's not pretend Mustafa's journey was one seamless ascent to greatness. He was often at odds with the rigid hierarchy of the Ottoman military, where tradition was treated with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. Mustafa questioned anything and everything, much to the chagrin of his superiors, who likely wished he'd just play along and stop rocking the boat. But Mustafa wasn't interested in smooth sailing. He was more of a full speed ahead and damn the torpedoes kind of guy. During his time at the academy, Mustafa became involved in the Young Turks movement, a group advocating for reform in the Ottoman Empire. They were less about sipping coffee and more about sipping the proverbial tea of political upheaval. The Young Turks wanted change, and Mustafa was more than willing to join their cause, not least because it gave him ample opportunity to debate, strategize, and crucially, avoid the dreariness of military protocol. As he rose through the ranks, Mustafa's leadership style began to solidify. He was direct, sometimes to the point of bluntness, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. This was a man who believed in action more than words, unless those words were delivered with a cutting edge and a touch of sarcasm. And while his detractors might have seen him as a loose cannon, his supporters saw a visionary, a man who understood that leadership wasn't about following orders, but about forging new paths. Mustafa Kemal's early years laid the groundwork for his later achievements. The skills he developed in military strategy, along with his penchant for questioning authority, would serve him well as the Ottoman Empire began to unravel like a poorly knitted sweater. Through it all, he never lost his sense of style, even if his choice of turtlenecks might have been a bit ahead of their time. So, as we wrap up this initial foray into the intriguing world of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, remember this. Great leaders aren't born, they're made, often in the crucible of rebellion and curiosity. And sometimes they come with a side of unmistakable sartorial flair. Stay tuned for the next chapter in Mustafa's journey, where the stakes get higher, the decisions become tougher, and the turtlenecks, well, they stay just as questionable. Speaking of sartorial flair, let's pivot from the fashion runway of Atatürk's early years to the gritty, mud-splattered trenches of Gallipoli. If life up to now had been a runway show of rebellious style and strategic thinking, the Gallipoli campaign was where Mustafa Kemal Atatürk would truly strut his stuff on the world stage. Picture this. It's 1915, and the Ottoman Empire is in the throes of World War I, grappling with more fronts than a retail chain on Black Friday. Enter the Allies, with a plan as ambitious as it was flawed. Seize control of the Dardanelles, the narrow strait connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara, and effectively deliver a 1-2 punch to the Ottoman heartland. Simple, right? Not quite. The Gallipoli Peninsula, a strategic linchpin in the Ottoman defense, was where Mustafa Kemal, now a lieutenant colonel, would make his mark. Imagine a chessboard where every move is life or death, and your opponent's pieces are armed with artillery. The Allies, comprising British, French, Australian, and New Zealand forces, landed on the beaches with a confidence that would soon be drowned in the blood-soaked sands of reality. Mustafa Kemal, stationed with the 19th Division, knew the terrain like the back of his hand, which, let's face it, was more than could be said for the invading forces, many of whom probably couldn't find Gallipoli on a map without a magnifying glass and a prayer. Strategic genius, check. A bit of luck, double check. But let's talk about the stubbornness that played a starring role. The kind of stubbornness that says, not on my watch, buddy, when faced with overwhelming odds. On April 25, 1915, as Allied troops made their fateful landings, Mustafa Kemal ordered his men to hold their positions. With ammunition running low and morale even lower, he rallied his troops with a simple yet profound directive. I do not order you to attack. I order you to die. Now, that's not exactly the kind of pep talk you'd hear at a corporate team-building retreat, but it worked. His troops stood their ground, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive, and turning what could have been a swift defeat into a drawn-out and bloody stalemate. For the Allies, Gallipoli was a lesson in the fine line between ambition and hubris, a campaign that quickly devolved from a bold offensive into a logistical nightmare. Picture overcooked rations that could double as doorstops, and hygiene standards that would make a medieval peasant cringe. Soldiers from both sides endured unspeakable conditions. Disease, dehydration, and dysentery were as much the enemy as the opposing forces. While history books tend to gloss over these less glamorous details, let's not kid ourselves. Trench warfare was a masterclass in misery. Mustafa Kemal's role in Gallipoli wasn't just about military maneuvers. It was about embodying resilience in the face of adversity. This was a man who understood that leadership wasn't about barking orders from the safety of the rear lines, but leading from the front, often quite literally. He was known to be in the thick of the action, a fact that endeared him to his soldiers and cemented his reputation as a leader who didn't just talk the talk. Now, while Mustafa's strategic moves were undoubtedly pivotal, let's not forget the part played by sheer dumb luck. The Allies' plans read like a comedy of errors, with miscommunications and miscalculations that would make even the most haphazard game of telephone seem efficient by comparison. And speaking of telephones, the lack of reliable communication meant that often decisions were made on the fly. For Mustafa, this was both a blessing and a curse, allowing him to make bold, unilateral decisions without waiting for orders from superiors who were, quite frankly, out of touch with the realities on the ground. Economically, the Gallipoli campaign was a financial sinkhole for the Allies, a costly endeavor that drained resources faster than a kid with a sweet tooth in a candy store. The Ottoman forces, on the other hand, were operating on a shoestring budget, making do with whatever they could scrounge up, and often relying on the ingenuity and resourcefulness of commanders like Mustafa. This wasn't just a battle of bullets and bayonets. It was a war of attrition, where the ability to endure was as crucial as the ability to engage. In the broader context, Gallipoli was a microcosm of World War I's grim reality, a conflict driven by outdated tactics meeting modern technology, where the human cost was devastatingly high. It was here that Mustafa Kemal emerged as a national hero, a beacon of hope for an empire teetering on the edge of oblivion. The victory at Gallipoli wasn't just a military triumph. It was a rallying cry for Turkish nationalism, a testament to what could be achieved when resolve met opportunity. So, as the dust settled over the battlefields of Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal stood on the precipice of history, ready to forge a new path for his people. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave him amidst the echoes of gunfire and the promise of a future yet to be written, a future where turtlenecks might just be the least of his revolutionary endeavors. Stay tuned for more tales from the life of a man who transformed not just his wardrobe, but an entire nation. So, with the dust of Gallipoli still settling and Atatürk's reputation soaring like a kite in a stiff breeze, you'd think he'd take a breather, maybe sip a Turkish tea, while reflecting on how he just thwarted some of the world's biggest powers in a place most of their soldiers couldn't spell. But no, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was just getting warmed up. If his life were a movie, Gallipoli was merely the gritty opening act. The Turkish War of Independence would be where the real fireworks began, and Atatürk was about to go full-on revolutionary director. Fast forward a few years to 1919. The Ottoman Empire, once the sprawling titan of the Mediterranean, was now a shadow of its former self, like a bloated blockbuster sequel nobody asked for. The Treaty of Sevres, signed in 1920, promised to carve up Ottoman lands like a Thanksgiving turkey, leaving Anatolia, the heartland, on the chopping block. It was a grim setup, but if there was one thing Atatürk excelled at, it was turning dire situations into opportunities. Cue the Turkish War of Independence, a conflict that was equal parts military genius and political chess game. Atatürk, now leading the charge for a sovereign Turkish state, had a knack for rallying troops, and not just with the usual "we'll fight them on the beaches" rhetoric. His methods were as varied as they were unexpected. Take, for instance, his infamous coffee diplomacy. Picture this: Atatürk, known for his love of a strong brew, using coffee as a tool to negotiate with foreign powers. It sounds absurd, like trying to solve a puzzle with a latte, but it worked. In an era when formal diplomatic channels were about as effective as a broken umbrella in a monsoon, Atatürk's informal chats over coffee created a rapport with foreign diplomats, allowing him to navigate the murky waters of international politics with surprising ease. But let's not sugarcoat it. Atatürk wasn't just sipping espresso with ambassadors. He was also knee-deep in reorganizing a military left in tatters by World War I. The Turkish national movement, spearheaded by Atatürk, was akin to trying to assemble a functional car from spare parts found in a junkyard. Yet, against the odds, he managed to pull it off. By 1922, the Turkish forces had driven out Greek troops from Anatolia, effectively rewriting the map and the rulebook on guerrilla warfare. Speaking of maps and rulebooks, let's delve into the economic chaos of post-war Turkey. Imagine a nation with a currency so unstable that it made Bitcoin look like a stable investment. The Ottoman economy had been battered by war, with rampant inflation and debt levels that could make a banker weep. Atatürk knew that building a nation on such shaky ground was like constructing a skyscraper on a foundation of quicksand. His solution: pragmatic nation-building strategies that would make Mac Jiva proud. Atatürk's economic reforms were as sweeping as they were bold. He abolished the Ottoman Empire's archaic tax system, which was about as effective as a chocolate teapot, and introduced a new, more equitable setup. Land reform was another critical piece of the puzzle. If you're picturing Atatürk handing out plots of land like opera dishing out cars, think again. This was a calculated move to break the feudal structures that had kept the rural population in perpetual poverty. He knew that a prosperous Turkey needed a solid agricultural base, and more importantly, a populace with a vested interest in the nation's success. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room. The Cultural Revolution Atatürk was orchestrating alongside his economic reforms. The Ottoman Empire was a cocktail of cultures, languages, and religions, a patchwork quilt that had kept its seams from bursting through sheer force of imperial will. Atatürk's vision of Turkey was one of unity under a single, secular identity. This meant sweeping changes, from adopting the Latin alphabet to promote literacy to establishing a public education system that was less about rote memorization and more about critical thinking. And then there was the matter of religion. Atatürk, ever the skeptic, envisioned a state where religion and government were like oil and water, distinct and separate. This wasn't a popular move with everyone, to put it mildly. Imagine trying to convince a population steeped in centuries of Islamic tradition that secularism was the way forward. It was like trying to sell ice to an Eskimo, but Atatürk, with his characteristic determination, forged ahead. He abolished the caliphate in 1924, a move akin to removing the anchor from a ship and hoping it would somehow stay in place. Risky, but ultimately necessary for the nation's modernization. While Atatürk's reforms were undeniably transformative, they were also controversial. His push for westernization, from clothing to music, often clashed with traditional values. Picture a country where the fez, a symbol of Ottoman identity, was banned in favor of the Western hat, a seemingly trivial change that sparked outrage and resistance. Atatürk's vision for Turkey was a modern, secular republic, but the path to that vision was fraught with tension and conflict, both internally and externally. Now, as we consider Atatürk's legacy in the Turkish War of Independence, it's worth noting that this wasn't just a war of guns and guts. It was a battle for the soul of a nation. Atatürk's leadership style, direct and unflinching, was pivotal in shaping modern Turkey. He understood that the key to success lay not just in winning battles, but in winning hearts and minds. And like any great director, he knew that the story was far from over. So, as Atatürk stood at the helm of a fledgling republic, ready to navigate the choppy waters of nation-building, there was no script, no roadmap, just a vision and the determination to see it through. The Turkish War of Independence was both an ending and a beginning, a testament to resilience and the indomitable spirit of a people determined to forge their own destiny. As we look ahead to the next chapter in Atatürk's storied life, one thing is clear. The man who once turned the tides at Gallipoli was about to take on the world in ways that would resonate for generations to come. But hold that thought. There's plenty more to explore on this remarkable journey. As the ink dried on the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, officially recognizing the Republic of Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk wasn't just basking in the glow of victory. Oh no, he was ready to roll up his proverbial sleeves and dive headfirst into what could only be described as the ultimate home makeover, transforming the Ottoman Empire's remnants into a modern, secular state. Imagine a nation where everyone suddenly had to shift from traditional attire to Western-style suits. Talk about wardrobe whiplash. Atatürk's domestic reforms were nothing short of radical. Where does one even begin? Well, Atatürk had a plan as ambitious as a kid trying to trade a pack of gum for a PlayStation. First up, education. The Ottoman education system was a medley of religious schools, each more focused on divine mysteries than practical knowledge. Atatürk, however, was all about the earthly realm and determined to drag education into the 20th century, kicking and screaming if necessary. Enter the 1924 law on unification of education. This law was like a giant broom, sweeping away the old religious schools and replacing them with a national, secular education system. It was a bold move, akin to swapping out your grandmother's antique furniture for sleek, minimalist IKEA pieces, functional but not without controversy. Within a decade, literacy rates soared from a mere 10% to around 30%, a testament to Atatürk's commitment to education. However, some folks weren't thrilled about trading in sacred texts for textbooks on geometry. The transition wasn't exactly smooth. Imagine convincing a nation to abandon centuries-old traditions overnight. Easier said than done. And then there was the alphabet reform of 1928. Atatürk decided that the Arabic script, which had been used for centuries, just wasn't cutting it. So, he introduced the Latin alphabet. Picture this. An entire nation forced to learn to read and write all over again. If you think your high school French class was a challenge, try relearning your entire language. Atatürk's rationale was that the Latin script would promote literacy and align Turkey more closely with the West. The upside, literacy rates did indeed climb, and the Turkish language became more accessible. The downside, utter chaos ensued as teachers and students scrambled to adapt. Picture a classroom full of adults staring at their new alphabets with the same bewilderment you might feel when attempting to assemble a flat-pack wardrobe without the instructions. Speaking of instructions, Atatürk was meticulous in his approach. He personally toured the country, donning his professor hat, literally, to teach the new alphabet. Imagine the leader of your country turning up to teach you the ABCs. It was hands-on leadership with a pinch of flair. Yet, not everyone was impressed. To some, it felt as if Atatürk had ripped a page out of their cultural identity and replaced it with a shiny, foreign script. The transition was rocky, but Atatürk's determination to modernize was relentless, even if it meant some folks felt like extras in a bizarre educational revolution. Next on the reform list was the legal system. Atatürk tossed out the Ottoman legal codes like old socks, placing them with a shiny new set of laws based on the Swiss Civil Code. The goal, a secular, equitable legal framework. Now, this was a big deal. It meant women could finally testify in court, inherit property, and choose their own spouses. The new laws were as revolutionary as swapping out dial-up internet for high-speed broadband. But not everyone was on board. Traditionalists grumbled, fearing that these changes would unravel the moral fabric of society. Atatürk, ever the pragmatist, was willing to take the heat for the greater good. Beyond the tangible reforms, Atatürk's vision was about crafting a national identity. He championed the idea of Turkishness, a secular, unified identity that transcended the ethnic and religious divisions of the past. This was a nation-building exercise on steroids, and just like any intense workout, there were growing pains. Cultural resistance was inevitable. Imagine being told to ditch your beloved local cuisine for a newfangled diet. Change was hard, and Atatürk's sweeping reforms were met with skepticism, and at times, outright defiance. In debunking the myth of Atatürk as an infallible reformer, it's crucial to highlight the unintended consequences of his policies. The push for westernization often sidelined traditional customs and alienated segments of the population. Atatürk's reforms, while visionary, sometimes bulldozed over cultural sensitivities like a freight train. The abolition of the caliphate, for instance, left a spiritual void for many. It was like cancelling a long-running TV show beloved by fans. Some were ready for the next big thing, while others were left mourning what was lost. Economically, Atatürk's reforms were a mixed bag of triumphs and trials. On one hand, he prioritized industrialization and infrastructure, launching state-owned factories and railways faster than you could say, economic boom. By the early 1930s, Turkey's GDP growth rate was a respectable 6% annually, a feat that would make any economist nod in approval. On the other hand, These rapid changes often left the rural population in the dust, struggling to keep up with the pace of modernization. Atatürk's policies sometimes widened the gap between the urban elite and rural communities, a chasm that would take decades to bridge. As we peel back the layers of Atatürk's domestic reforms, it's clear that his legacy is as complex as it is captivating. He was a man who dared to dream big, often at the expense of tradition. While his reforms sparked a renaissance in Turkish society, they also ignited debates that continue to this day. Atatürk's vision for Turkey was one of progress and unity, but like any grand plan, it came with its share of challenges and controversies. So, as we pause in this ongoing saga of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's transformative leadership, remember this: history is messy, reforms are rarely straightforward, and even the most compelling visionaries face resistance. Atatürk's journey was far from over, and the ripple effects of his reforms would continue to shape Turkey's future. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we delve deeper into the complexities of his legacy and the nation he helped forge. Now, as the dust of reform settled and the echoes of transformation began to fade, we find ourselves at the doorstep of 1938. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, having spent nearly 2 decades reshaping Turkey with the enthusiasm of a kid, handed the keys to a candy shop, was facing the twilight of his storied life. A figure larger than life itself, Atatürk had become synonymous with modern Turkey. But with such grandeur comes the inevitable, the emergence of a cult of personality that would make any Hollywood star blush. Atatürk's death on November 10, 1938, was more than just the passing of a statesman. It was the closing of a chapter that had redefined a nation. Imagine the scene: a country in mourning, people flooding the streets, and a sense of collective loss that felt as tangible as the marble mausoleum eventually built in his honor. His funeral was an affair of epic proportions, with international dignitaries and common citizens alike paying their respects. It was as if the very air hung heavy with grief, a testament to the impact of a man who had carved his vision into the very soul of Turkey. But let's not get too swept away by the melodrama. In the years following his death, Atatürk became less of a historical figure and more of a legend, an icon whose image was plastered across every classroom, whose speeches were memorized by school children, and whose vision was revered almost religiously. Statues of him sprouted like mushrooms after a rainstorm, each one a reminder of his enduring presence. And therein lies the rub. Atatürk's legacy was not merely about what he did, but how he was remembered. A cult of personality emerged, elevating him to near-mythical status. His ideals, while groundbreaking, became enshrined in a way that allowed little room for critique or deviation, a double-edged sword if ever there was one. Now, let's strip away the romantic veneer for a moment and talk about the realities that often get glossed over. Atatürk's leadership, while visionary, had its fair share of authoritarian tendencies. He was a man who brooked little opposition, often ruling with an iron fist wrapped in the velvet glove of reform. Political dissent was about as welcome as rain at a beach wedding, and his government, while modernizing, maintained strict control over the press and political discourse. The single-party system he left behind was as much about maintaining stability as it was about suppressing dissent. It's the kind of power play that would make any Machiavellian strategist nod in grim approval. Economically, Atatürk's policies laid the foundation for a burgeoning nation, but they weren't without their pitfalls. By the late 1930s, Turkey was still grappling with the growing pains of industrialization. The state-controlled economic model, while initially successful, began showing cracks as global economic conditions fluctuated. The Great Depression had left its mark, and Turkey, like many nations, was not immune to the economic ripples that followed. Inflation was a persistent thorn in the side of progress, and while the state's interventionist policies had brought about significant infrastructure developments, they also stifled private enterprise, creating a paradox of progress and constraint. Socially, Atatürk's reforms had catalyzed a cultural shift that would echo through the ages. The push for secularism and westernization had created a new social fabric, one that was both cohesive and contentious. The abolition of the caliphate and the introduction of civil codes had redefined the role of religion in public life, creating a secular state that was as much a triumph as it was a source of ongoing tension. For many, this was a breath of fresh air, a liberation from centuries of religious oversight. For others, it felt like a severing of ties with a cherished past. The tension between modernity and tradition was a dance that would continue long after Atatürk's death, shaping Turkey's identity in ways both profound and perplexing. The question remains, was Atatürk the hero Turkey needed, or merely the one it was stuck with? It's a question as loaded as a baked potato at a steakhouse, and equally difficult to digest. On one hand, Atatürk was undeniably a visionary, a leader who dragged Turkey from the brink of oblivion into the modern world with unparalleled resolve. His reforms laid the groundwork for a nation that would stand strong in the face of adversity, a testament to his enduring legacy. Yet, on the flip side, his authoritarian approach and the subsequent cult of personality left little room for alternative narratives. The romanticism of his immortal image often overshadows the complexities of his leadership, an oversight that can skew our understanding of history. It's easy to idolize a figurehead, to see them as a savior rather than a flawed human being navigating an imperfect world. Atatürk was both, a man of immense achievement and undeniable shortcomings. In the grand tapestry of history, Atatürk's story is woven with threads of triumph and tension, of radical reform and rigid control. His legacy is a paradox, a shining beacon of progress and a cautionary tale of power. As we wrap up this journey through his life and times, it's worth remembering that history is not a monochrome portrait, but a vibrant mosaic, rich with the hues of human complexity. Atatürk's influence endures, both in the marble monuments that dart the Turkish landscape and in the ongoing debates about his legacy, debates that will continue to shape the nation he so profoundly transformed. So, as we close the book on Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, let's carry forward not just the myth but the man, the visionary whose dreams birthed a nation and whose shadows still linger in its corridors. Because in the end, the measure of a leader is not just in what they build, but in what they leave behind, a legacy as layered as the history that bore it. If you think your family reunions are awkward, let's talk about the Howard clan. Born around 1523, Catherine Howard was thrust into the chaos of one of England's most ambitious families. You see, the Howards were practically the Kardashians of Tudor England, minus the reality TV show, but with plenty of court intrigue. They were all about power, position, and if we're being honest, a bit of a superiority complex. The family tree was a web of nobles, with branches reaching up to the Duke of Norfolk, one of the most influential men at court. Catherine's life was essentially set on a collision course with the royal spotlight from the get-go. Now, let's address the myth of Catherine as the clueless ingenue. The tale often goes that she was a naive young girl swept up in the tides of history, but let's not kid ourselves. Growing up in the Howard household, she was more likely marinating in ambition. Catherine's father, Lord Edmund Howard, was the classic example of a nobleman who had more titles than money. He was the third son of the Duke of Norfolk, which in noble terms means you're not getting the castle, just a pat on the back and a good luck as you make your way through life. The education Catherine received was less about books and more about survival skills in a politically charged environment. She spent much of her childhood in the household of her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, whose home was a vibrant mix of young wards and ladies-in-waiting. It was less Hogwarts, more Gossip Girl with a side of Elizabethan etiquette. Catherine's education was a patchwork affair, focused on music, dancing, and the art of conversation, the kind of skills that would catch a king's eye rather than a scholar's respect. Let's not pretend this was some idyllic upbringing. The household was a bustling hub, but supervision wasn't exactly a priority. With Agnes busy managing her own social calendar, the young ladies had quite the freedom, and let's just say, they didn't always use it to practice embroidery. Rumor has it, Catherine had her first romantic escapades here, notably with a music teacher named Henry Manox. Ah, romance and lute lessons, a tale as old as time. But gossip and flirtations in such a household weren't so much scandalous as they were inevitable. Fast forward a few years, and Catherine's orbit intersected with the royal court, thanks to her cousin Anne Boleyn. Yes, that Anne Boleyn, the one who married Henry Roman VIII, lost her head, literally, and changed the course of English history. The Howard family had a knack for getting their daughters into royal matrimonial messes. It was almost their signature move. By the time Catherine made her debut at court, Henry Roman VIII wasn't quite the dashing prince he'd once been. Think less charming monarch and more aging rock star, trying to reclaim glory days. His waistline was expanding faster than the English Empire, and his health was about as reliable as a Tudor-era plumbing system. But power is attractive, and Catherine's family saw an opportunity to climb the social ladder once again. Catherine entered the court as a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife. Anne of Cleves was a political match that went about as well as a blind date set up by a meddling aunt. Henry, famously disappointed by Anne's appearance, was already looking for an out. Enter Catherine, young, lively, and very much the antithesis of the wife Henry was trying to rid himself of. The king's eye wandered, and the Howards were all too ready to nudge Catherine into the spotlight. Was she an innocent pawn or a willing participant? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Catherine's allure was undeniable, and Henry, ever the romantic, or perhaps ever the man having a midlife crisis, was quickly smitten. It wasn't long before Catherine found herself the object of the king's affection, a position both intoxicating and perilous. Let's take a moment to appreciate the irony. Here was Henry, a man who broke from the Catholic Church to marry Anne Boleyn, only to discard her for another, now entangled with another Howard girl. The Howards had managed to weave themselves back into the royal tapestry, and Catherine was at the center of it all. So, Catherine Howard's ascent wasn't just a fluke of history or a romantic tragedy waiting to unfold. It was a calculated move by a family that specialized in playing the long game. They knew the stakes, and they knew the risks. Catherine was young, yes, but not entirely blind to the ambitions around her. Her story, like many of the Tudor era, was a blend of personal choice and familial ambition, a dangerous cocktail when served at the court of Henry Roman VIII. And as we'll see, the price of such ambition was often paid in blood. Catherine Howard's story was about to take another dizzying turn. As she found herself amidst the high-stakes drama of Henry Roman VIII court, her youthful charm and vivacity were like catnip to the aging king. Let's not sugarcoat it. Henry was in the throes of a classic midlife crisis, but instead of buying a sports car, he married a teenager. This was 1540, and Henry, now a 49-year-old monarch with a waistline that rivaled his expanding realm, was desperately clinging to his golden years. He was looking for a rose without a thorn, an antidote to his previous romantic misfires. Enter Catherine, young, lively, and seemingly free of the complications that plagued his former wives. Now, you might be wondering why a king, especially one with a history as colorful as Henry's, would bother with a fifth marriage. Was he a hopeless romantic, or just hopeless? The truth is a cocktail of both, with a generous dash of political maneuvering. Henry's previous marriage to Anne of Cleves was basically a diplomatic disaster. Think of it as the Tinder date from hell, with the added pressure of international politics. That marriage had been annulled on the grounds of non-consummation, a polite way of saying Henry found Anne less appealing than her portrait suggested, leaving him free to pursue Catherine. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, Henry's ego. His desire for a young, beautiful wife was as much about personal validation as it was about political stability. Catherine was everything Anne of Cleves wasn't: youthful, English, and most importantly, willing. Henry saw in her a chance to restore the vigor of his youth, to prove that he was still the virile king of yesteryears, not the old lion with a dodgy leg, thanks to that infamous jousting accident and a burgeoning waistline. Catherine, meanwhile, was swept up in the whirlwind. She was young, yes, but not entirely naive. A Howard by birth, she understood the game of court politics better than most. Her family's ambitions were woven into the very fabric of her existence. They had played their cards well, placing Catherine at Henry's side, and she knew what was at stake. Still, the allure of being queen, of holding power and influence, must have been intoxicating. But let's not romanticize this too much. Catherine's rise was not just a fairy tale of love and ambition, it was also a tale of survival. The Tudor court was a shark tank, and the Howards were seasoned swimmers. They knew the risks involved, and they knew that Catherine's position was as precarious as it was powerful. The political climate was tense. England was navigating the turbulent waters of religious reform, and Henry's court was a hotbed of intrigue and factionalism. The Howards, staunch Catholics, saw Catherine's marriage as a way to consolidate their influence over Henry and steer the religious course of the nation. But this was a dangerous game. Henry was not a puppet to be easily manipulated, and the stakes were higher than ever. The marriage itself was a grand affair, as royal weddings tend to be, but beneath the gilded surface lay a mismatched union. Catherine, barely in her late teens, was thrust into the role of queen consort, expected to produce an heir and navigate the treacherous waters of court life. Henry, on the other hand, was past his prime, both physically and politically. Their union was less about love and more about the machinations of power, an arrangement rather than a romance. In contemporary terms, Catherine was the new starlet on the scene, while Henry was the aging celebrity trying to stay relevant. She was meant to be his trophy wife, his proof to the world that he was still in his prime. But the reality was far more complex. Catherine's role was fraught with danger. The court was a place where whispers could lead to downfall, where the wrong move could cost you your head. And then there was the matter of Henry's infamous temper. His track record with wives wasn't exactly reassuring. Catherine would have been acutely aware of her predecessor's fates: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, and now married to her. The pressure must have been immense, the stakes incredibly high. As Catherine settled into her new life as queen, the court watched with bated breath. The Howards were poised to capitalize on their newfound influence, but they were also aware that their position was precarious. Henry's whims were as unpredictable as the English weather, and any misstep could lead to disaster. The tale of Catherine Howard and Henry Roman VIII was not one of simple romance or ambition. It was a complex tapestry of political maneuvering, personal desire, and the harsh realities of power. As their marriage began, the stage was set for a drama that would unfold with all the intrigue and intensity of a Shakespearean tragedy. But this was no play. It was real life, with real consequences. And as history would eventually show, the price of ambition in the Tudor court was often paid in blood. Catherine Howard's entrance into the Tudor court was akin to a meteor streaking across the night sky, brilliant and fleeting. Her life as queen was a dizzying blend of opulence, scrutiny, and the constant clatter of political chess being played around her. As a teenage consort to a king who was more a relic of past glory than a vibrant sovereign, Catherine was thrust into a world where appearances were everything, and reality a mere inconvenience. Let's talk bling, Tudor style. If you think a royal court is just a boring bunch of people in stiff clothing, think again. The Tudor court was a kaleidoscope of colour, sound, and excess. Henry Roman VIII, despite his expanding girth and temperamental moods, knew how to put on a show. His court was a spectacle of wealth, with tapestries that cost more than a modern-day mansion and banquets that could feed a small village for a week. For Catherine, this was not just a new lifestyle. It was a crash course in extravagance. Henry showered Catherine with gifts that could make any modern influencer green with envy. There were jewels, pearls, emeralds, and rubies, set in elaborate necklaces and rings. Think of it as the 16th century version of a king-sized shopping spree. In one particularly grand gesture, Henry gifted her with a collection of furs, including sable, which was the medieval equivalent of a luxury sports car. These gifts were not just tokens of affection. They were symbols of status, meant to project power and prestige at a court where every glance and gesture was measured. But let's not get too swept away by visions of fairy tale romance. Henry's lavish spending on Catherine was also a strategic move. It was a way to cement her position, and by extension, his own as a youthful, virile king. The reality, however, was that all the jewels in the world couldn't mask the truth. Catherine was young, yes, but she was navigating a court filled with seasoned players who had perfected the art of political maneuvering. Underneath the glitz, Catherine was living in a pressure cooker. As queen, she was expected to perform on multiple fronts, as a gracious hostess, a political ally, and most crucially, as the bearer of a future heir. The Tudor court was not a forgiving place for those who faltered. Every misstep was magnified, every whisper a potential scandal. Catherine, with her youthful energy, was a breath of fresh air in a court that had grown stale. But that didn't mean she was invulnerable to its dangers. The romanticized image of Catherine as a carefree teenager frolicking through palace halls is a myth that needs debunking. Yes, she was young and lively, but she was also acutely aware of the tightrope she was walking. Her every move was scrutinized, not just by Henry, but by the entire court, ready to pounce at any sign of weakness. She was a queen, yes, but also a pawn in the greater game of Tudor politics. The court was a microcosm of the larger political landscape. England, under Henry, was in a state of religious flux, caught between Catholic traditions and the Protestant Reformation. Catherine's marriage to Henry was a nod to the old guard, a reinforcement of the Catholic presence at court. But it was also a double-edged sword. The Howards, despite, or perhaps because of, their influence, were constantly under suspicion, their Catholic loyalties a potential liability in a court that lived in fear of heresy. And then there was the matter of Henry's infamous paranoia. His moods could swing faster than a London weather vane. One moment, he was the doting husband, the next, a suspicious tyrant. Catherine had to navigate this minefield with the grace of a dancer on a tightrope, knowing that any misstep could lead to disaster. So, while Catherine's life at court was filled with the splendor of jewels and feasts, it was also a world where danger lurked in every shadow. The Tudor court was a stage set for drama, and Catherine was its newest star, thrust into the spotlight with all eyes on her. But as we'll see, the pressures and intrigues of court life were not just the stuff of legend. They were very real, and they were about to close in on Catherine with devastating effect. Catherine Howard's story is not just a tale of youthful folly or romantic misadventure. It's a sobering reminder of the harsh realities that lay beneath the gilded surface of court life. Her queenship, brief as it was, highlights the precarious nature of power and the human costs of ambition. As the court buzzed with gossip and intrigue, Catherine's fate was being sealed, not by a fairy godmother, but by the relentless machinations of those who saw her as both a threat and an opportunity. In the end, the story of Catherine Howard is a cautionary tale, not just of a young queen caught in the web of Tudor politics, but of the dangerous dance between power, ambition, and the inexorable march of history. As her time at court unfolded, the stage was set for a tragic conclusion that would resonate through the annals of history, a stark reminder that in the Tudor court, the line between triumph and tragedy was as thin as a thread of gold. As Catherine Howard's star continued to rise, her life at court was a swirling vortex of glamour and peril. But beneath the polished veneer of royal life, storm clouds were gathering. The same court that had been dazzled by her youth and charm would soon turn into a den of whispers and accusations. And let's be honest, in the Tudor court, whispers were as deadly as daggers. Catherine's alleged infidelities were the tinder that ignited the blaze of her downfall. Let's talk about the evidence, or lack thereof. The Tudor court was a breeding ground for gossip, and rumor had it that Catherine wasn't just flirting with danger, she was practically waltzing with it. The most notorious name in this tangled web was Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber. In today's terms, Culpeper was like the suave personal trainer who got a little too close to the boss's wife. Their supposed affair was the stuff of scandalous whispers. But let's pump the brakes on this runaway narrative and consider the evidence. The main accusation hinged on a letter Catherine allegedly wrote to Culpeper, filled with all the subtlety of a teenage love note. But here's the kicker. The authenticity of this letter has been debated by historians for centuries. Was it a genuine expression of infatuation or a cleverly forged piece of evidence? The jury's still out. What is indisputable, however, is that Catherine and Culpeper were seen together, and in Tudor England, perception was everything. The court was a heart-house of intrigue, where a glance could be as damning as a confession. And while we're myth-busting, let's remember that the court was a labyrinth of private agendas. Culpeper himself was no innocent bystander. He had ambitions that could be furthered by a connection to the Queen, but they weren't the only players in this drama. Enter Francis Dereham, another figure from Catherine's past. Before she was queen, Catherine had a dalliance with Dereham, who served in the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk's household. Their relationship was an open secret, a prequel to the main event that was Catherine's life at court. When Dereham re-emerged, he was appointed as a secretary in her household, a decision that would come back to haunt her. The real twist in this tale was Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Picture him as the detective in a noir film, piecing together scraps of gossip and innuendo. Cranmer, a Protestant reformer, had his reasons for wanting to see Catherine fall. The Howards, staunch Catholics, were a thorn in the side of reformist ambitions, and Catherine was their most visible symbol. Cranmer's role in Catherine's downfall was less about personal vendetta and more about the political chessboard. He was the one who brought the allegations to Henry's attention, doing so with all the subtlety of a courtly whisper. On All Saints' Day 1541, Cranmer slipped a note to Henry during Mass, because nothing says, "Let's talk about your wife's alleged infidelity," like a discreet message during church. Henry's reaction was predictably explosive. His ego, as fragile as a Tudor tapestry, couldn't handle the possibility that his rose without a thorn might be a little too thorny. The king ordered an investigation, and the court transformed into a frenzy of accusation and counter-accusation. Catherine's arrest in November 1541 was as swift as it was shocking. One moment she was the queen, the next, a prisoner. The charges against her were serious: adultery, treason, and the ultimate betrayal of a king who had elevated her from obscurity. In the eyes of the law, her alleged infidelities were not just personal failings, they were acts of treason. The evidence against her was pieced together through confessions extracted under duress and testimonies that would make any lawyer today cry foul. Dereham and Culpeper were both arrested, and under interrogation, they implicated Catherine in a web of illicit liaisons. But let's not forget the context. Tudor justice was less about fairness and more about expedience. Torture and coercion were the tools of the trade, and confessions were as much about survival as they were about truth. As Catherine sat imprisoned in Sion Abbey, her once dazzling life was reduced to a grim, wading game. The court that had once celebrated her was now a chorus of condemnation. The Howards, ever the opportunists, distanced themselves, leaving Catherine to face the music alone. The speed of Catherine's fall from grace was a testament to the brutal efficiency of Tudor politics. One moment she was adored, the next she was alone, a teenage queen facing the wrath of a king scorned. It's easy to paint Catherine as a victim, young, naive, and caught in a web beyond her control, but let's give her some agency. She was a product of her environment, a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. Catherine Howard's story, with its blend of romance and treachery, is the stuff of legend. But beneath the seductive allure lies a harsh reality. Her life was a cautionary tale of ambition and the perilous nature of power, a reminder that in the Tudor court, fortunes could change with the whisper of a scandal. As we pause at this dramatic juncture, keep in mind that the final act of Catherine's life would unfold not in the glittering halls of Hampton Court, but in the shadow of the executioner's axe. And that, dear listeners, is a story for another day. As the executioner sharpened his axe on that chilly morning of February 13, 1542, the tragic curtain was about to fall on Catherine Howard's turbulent life. Her final days were spent at the Tower of London, a place as haunted by ghosts of the past as the decisions that brought her there. She was just 19, a teenager caught in the unforgiving gears of Tudor politics, facing the same grim fate as her infamous cousin, Anne Boleyn. Catherine's execution was not just a personal tragedy, but a political statement. Henry Roman VIII court was a beast that devoured its own, and Catherine's fall from grace was a brutal reminder that no one, not even a queen, was immune to its appetite. Her execution was swift and clinical, a spectacle designed to reinforce the king's authority and silence dissent. In the world of Tudor power games, mercy was as rare as a sunny day in London. Henry Roman VIII, now a widower for the 5th time, continued to rule with a mix of charm and tyranny. His reaction to Catherine's execution was a masterclass in political theatre. He publicly lamented her betrayal while privately ensuring his power remained unchallenged. Henry's legacy was one of ruthless efficiency, a king who believed his divine right was worth any personal cost. And if that meant sacrificing a teenage queen, so be it. The aftermath of Catherine's execution rippled through the Howard family like an earthquake. The once powerful clan found itself on the defensive, their influence waning under the weight of scandal. The Duke of Norfolk, Catherine's uncle, was forced to distance himself from the political scene, his dreams of Catholic resurgence dashed. The Howards had played a high-stakes game, and Catherine's execution was their ultimate loss. The political implications of her death were not lost on the court. Henry's 6th and final wife, Catherine Parr, was a shrewd choice, a widow with a keen understanding of court politics and, crucially, Protestant sympathies. Her marriage to Henry was not just a personal union, but a strategic alliance, steering England further from its Catholic roots. Catherine Howard's legacy is a complex tapestry woven from strands of myth and reality. Often cast as a naive victim or a reckless flirt, her story is far richer than the clichés suggest. Catherine was a product of her environment, shaped by the ambitions of her family and the brutal realities of the Tudor court. Her life and death serve as a poignant reminder of the perilous path walked by those who sought power in an era where the stakes were as high as the gallows. History has judged Catherine through a lens tinted by romanticism and tragedy. The image of the young queen, full of life and promise, cut down in her prime, resonates through the centuries. But let's not sugarcoat the past. Catherine was a player in a dangerous game, fully aware of the risks. The court was a minefield, and she stepped on the wrong one. The fascination with Catherine's story endures, a testament to the enduring allure of the Tudor period. Her life is a cautionary tale, a chapter in the larger saga of Henry Roman VIII reign, a reign that was as much about personal vendettas and political maneuvering as it was about the transformation of England. Catherine's tale is a stark reminder that behind the gilded facades of history are human stories, fraught with ambition, desire, and the harsh consequences of both. In the end, the story of Catherine Howard is not just a footnote in the annals of history, but a vivid illustration of the volatility of Tudor England. Her life was a brief, brilliant flash, a reminder that in the court of Henry Roman VIII, fortunes could change as swiftly as the tide. And as we close this chapter, we're left with a haunting question. Was Catherine a victim of her own making, or merely a casualty of a world that demanded too much from those who dared to dream? The answer, like the echoes of the past, remains tantalizingly elusive. When it comes to the ancient Celts, most of us picture a misty forest full of white-robed druids waving wands like Hogwarts dropouts. But let's cut through the fog and get to the reality, which is both less magical and more interesting. The druids weren't exactly Harry Potter with a side of Merlin. They were more like a blend of priest, judge, and community therapist without the couch. So, let's put down the fantasy novel and pick up some real history, shall we? Now, the Celts were all about variety. They had roughly as many gods as a modern kid has TikTok followers. We're talking hundreds of deities, each with their own quirks and specializations. You've got your Dagda, the good god, who was a bit of a jack-of-all-trades and master of fun, armed with a magical club that could both take and give life. And then there's Morrigan, the war goddess who didn't need an Instagram filter to strike fear into the hearts of men. It's like they had a god for every occasion, whether it was a good harvest or an especially tricky battle. But don't be fooled into thinking this was all just idol worship. These beliefs were woven into the very fabric of Celtic life. The gods weren't distant figures lounging in some divine VIP lounge. They were right there, in the streams, the trees, and the sky. Every decision, big or small, was under the gods' watchful eyes, which probably made even the most mundane choices feel like a game of divine roulette. Did you just eat the last piece of bread? Better hope you didn't tick off the grain god. Speaking of druids, let's clear up a few things. First off, these guys weren't just standing around in stone circles all day. They were the intellectual elite of their time, which sounds fancy until you remember they lived in an era when bathing was optional. Druids were responsible for education, legal disputes, and religious ceremonies. They were the walking, talking Wikipedia of the Celtic world, only with more robes and less fact-checking. They didn't write anything down, which makes you wonder if they were protecting sacred knowledge or just avoiding paper cuts. Despite their reputation, druids weren't all about flashy magic. Sure, they had a knack for astronomy and nature, which probably seemed like wizardry to the average Celtic Joe. But they weren't casting spells left and right. Instead, they wielded influence through knowledge and social clout. Think of them as the original influencers, minus the sponsored posts. Now, let's talk sacrifices. It's a grim topic, but hey, history isn't always sunshine and rainbows. The Celts believed in appeasing the gods with offerings, which occasionally meant sacrificing animals or even humans. Before you gasp in horror, remember that this was a time when survival was tough, and the gods' favor could mean the difference between feast and famine. It's like offering your best cookies to Santa, only with higher stakes and a lot more blood. But don't go thinking the Celts were all about doom and gloom. Their festivals were legendary. Samhain, their version of Halloween, was a time when the veil between the living and the dead was so thin you could almost trip over it. They celebrated the cycle of life and death with a party that makes our modern festivities look like a quiet night in. It was a time for bonfires, storytelling, and maybe a little too much mead. In truth, the Celtic way of life was a complex tapestry of faith, ritual, and community. The gods were as much a part of their world as the trees and stones. The romanticized image of Celtic life might be fun to imagine, but the reality is a lot more nuanced and, frankly, way more interesting. So, next time you see a druid in popular culture, remember they were more likely to be mediating disputes than conjuring fireballs. And if you ever find yourself in a misty forest, don't expect to find magic. Just a deep, fascinating history that's stranger than any fiction. The Celts, it turns out, were as much about the party lifestyle as they were about appeasing the gods. When it came to festivals, these folks knew how to throw a bash that could make even Coachella look like a middle school dance. Take Samhain, for example. This was not just a proto-Halloween with extra fog machines. It was a full-blown communal event that marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of the darker half of the year. Sure, it was about scaring off spirits, those pesky supernatural freeloaders who were believed to roam the earth. But it was also about community bonding over bonfires large enough to roast marshmallows for an entire village. Samhain was a crucial time for cattle, those hooved celebrities of the Celtic economic system. Livestock were brought back from summer pastures and sorted, those destined for winter slaughter, and those lucky enough to get a reprieve. This wasn't just a practical move. It was a community affair that required cooperation and negotiation. Picture it as a combination of a neighborhood block party and a Wall Street stock exchange, with cows instead of shares. And then there was Beltane, the festival of fire and fertility that made sure everyone knew winter was officially over. Celebrated around May 1st, Beltane was all about encouraging the crops to grow and ensuring that, come harvest time, the gods wouldn't leave them high and dry. People lit bonfires and drove their cattle between them, a kind of ancient purification process that sounds suspiciously like a farmyard version of a car wash. But hey, it was believed to protect the animals from disease and ensure fertility, so who's to argue with tradition? It wasn't just about the cattle, though. These festivals also served as prime opportunities for trade and social alliances. In a time when the nearest shopping mall was a distant dream, gatherings like Samhain and Beltane were the ultimate marketplaces. The Celts didn't just swap goods, they exchanged news, forged alliances, and on more than a few occasions probably started a feud or two over the price of a particularly fine piece of pottery. These festivals were social glue, sticking communities together in a time when communication was less about texting and more about yelling across a field. Speaking of fields, let's not forget the agricultural stakes involved. The Celts had to manage their resources with the precision of a modern-day project manager. A successful harvest wasn't just a cause for celebration, it was a matter of survival. If the gods didn't bless the crops, it wasn't just a bad year, it could mean starvation. So, when they went all out for these festivals, it was with the understanding that this was their chance to tip the cosmic scales in their favor. The bonfires, the sacrifices, and even the drunken revelry were all aimed at coaxing the gods into a little divine favor. Now, let's bust a myth while we're here. The image of these festivals as wild, chaotic affairs where anything goes is only part of the story. Sure, there was revelry, but there was also order. Rituals were followed with precision, and everyone knew their part. It wasn't a free-for-all. It was structured chaos, a bit like a medieval Burning Man with a strict itinerary. The economic implications of these festivals were also significant. Seasonal gatherings helped redistribute resources within communities, ensuring that everyone had what they needed to survive the winter months. Think of it as medieval social security with a side of ritual bonfires. Trade wasn't just a side hustle, it was essential. The exchange of goods and livestock was crucial for maintaining the community's economic stability. And as for the politics, well, these gatherings were the perfect backdrop for leaders to assert their influence, settle disputes, and make important decisions. In a world where power was often as fluid as the mead flowing from those ceremonial cups, festivals were an ideal stage for diplomacy. The chieftains and druids used these occasions to reinforce alliances, perhaps with a bit less of the medieval backstabbing we see in fantasy novels. In essence, These festivals were a microcosm of Celtic society, a blend of the spiritual, the economic, and the social. They were as much about the here and now as they were about the mystical. The Celts knew how to balance the practical with the supernatural, ensuring that their society ran smoothly while keeping the gods on their side. So, the next time someone tells you that ancient festivals were just a bunch of people dancing around fires, you can hit them with the truth. It was a sophisticated system, part celebration, part survival strategy, and entirely fascinating. Now, while the festivals might have been the Celts' version of a community mixer, their warrior culture was another party altogether, one where the guest list was shorter, the stakes were higher, and nobody left unscathed. The Celts didn't just believe in gods of war, they worshipped them like rock stars, complete with the kind of bloody fanfare that would make even the most hardcore metalhead blush. Let's dive into the murky waters of Celtic warfare, complete with divine endorsements and a dash of brutal reality. First off, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the war chariot, in the room. The Celts had a reputation for being ferocious fighters. The Romans, who were generally not known for handing out compliments, described them as terrifying. And while it's easy to dismiss this as Roman bravado, the Celts did have a flair for making an entrance. Picture this, warriors charging into battle, their faces painted blue with woad, screaming like banshees. It's the ancient equivalent of entering a boardroom in a clown suit while yelling your quarterly report. Effective, maybe. Memorable, definitely. But why the theatrics? Well, it wasn't just for shock and awe. The Celts firmly believed that their war guards, like the formidable Morrigan, who was known to shapeshift into a crow and watch battles unfold from the sidelines, were directly watching over them. These deities were present in every clash, every skirmish, and every duel. The belief was that if you fought bravely and died honorably, you might just earn a seat at the divine table, which was a pretty sweet gig compared to the alternatives of the afterlife. Now, let's talk about initiation rituals. Forget your modern-day rites of passage, like getting a driver's license or surviving a family Thanksgiving without drama. Celtic warrior initiation was a whole other beast. Young warriors were often sent on solo missions to prove their mettle, sometimes needing to bring back the heads of enemies as trophies. Yes, you heard that right. Heads. Wasn't just about the thrill of the hunt. It was a spiritual act. They believed the head was the seat of the soul, and thus a powerful talisman. This wasn't just a gruesome souvenir, but a way to harness spiritual power, like collecting Funko Pops with a side of existential dread. This warrior ethos was deeply tied to their religious beliefs. The Celts didn't just fight for land or wealth. They fought for honor, and in doing so, they believed they were enacting the will of the gods. Their chieftains would consult druids before battle, seeking divine favor through rituals that sometimes involved human sacrifices. Again, grim. But in a world where life was as fragile as the peace talks between rival tribes, a little divine help could go a long way. When you're staring down the barrel of an enemy's spear, or rather, the pointy end of one, knowing the gods have your back was likely a comfort. But let's not get too carried away with romantic notions of noble warriors and divine intervention. The reality of Celtic warfare was as brutal as it was strategic. The Celts were not just brawlers, they were skilled tacticians. They formed alliances when it suited their needs, often uniting different tribes against a common enemy. This wasn't some simplistic, honor-driven society. It was a complex network of political machinations where allegiances could change faster than the weather in an Irish summer. Their strategies were as varied as their gods. They used everything from chariots, those ancient battle tanks complete with spiked wheels, to guerrilla tactics that would make modern special forces proud. Ambushes, raids, and psychological warfare were all part of the package. When the Romans complained about the Celts' unpredictability, it was likely because they'd just been on the receiving end of one of these ingenious, if chaotic, battle plans. And let's not forget the economics of war. Armies need funding, and the Celts were no exception. Warfare was an expensive endeavor, and raising an army wasn't just about gathering willing fighters. It was about resources. Weapons needed forging, chariots needed building, and warriors needed feeding. This was a time when the cost of a single sword could be equivalent to a year's wages for an average farmer. War wasn't just a pastime, it was an investment, and one that often demanded a return in the form of plunder and territory. In the grand scheme of things, Celtic warfare was as much about survival as it was about glory. For all the myths and legends, the reality was often stark. The Celts fought not just for honor, but for land, for food, and for the future of their tribes. The gods of war might have been watching from the heavens, but down on earth, it was a game of wits, strength, and sometimes sheer desperation. So, next time you find yourself picturing a Celtic warrior charging into battle, remember that behind the face paint and the war cries was a mind as sharp as any sword. They fought with the blessings of their gods and the weight of their world on their shoulders. And while the legends tell of glory and divine favor, the reality was a lot more nuanced and infinitely more human. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Celts is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover in this wild, war-filled chapter of history. While warriors painted in woad were busy making headlines, Celtic women were quietly, well, sometimes not so quietly, shaping the spiritual and societal foundations. The role of women in Celtic religious practices was as surprising as it was empowering, a refreshing twist on the typical ancient narrative where women are often relegated to the background, waving from the sidelines like cheerleaders at an all-male game. Let's start with the Druids, those enigmatic keepers of knowledge and ritual. While most stories spotlight the male Druids, women were just as likely to be seen donning the robes and wielding influence. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that female Druids, or Druidesses if you fancy a gendered term, were not only participants, but leaders in religious ceremonies. Imagine the surprise of a Roman traveller stumbling upon a Druid circle, expecting Gandalf, only to find Galadriel calling the shots. It's like showing up to a business meeting, expecting the CEO to be a guy named Steve, and finding out it's Stephanie running the show. The presence of women wasn't just a token gesture. They held real power, which might explain the Romans' occasional unease around Celtic women. In the annals of Roman history, there are tales of formidable women like Boudica, who led a rebellion against Roman occupation, but she wasn't an anomaly. The Celts seem to have a knack for producing women who could command armies and religious followers with equal aplomb. These ladies didn't just break glass ceilings, they shattered them with a battle axe. In the world of Celtic deities, women didn't just play supporting roles. Goddesses like Brigid, who covered everything from poetry to healing to blacksmithing, were central to Celtic religion. She was like a one-woman pantheon, handling more portfolios than a corporate executive on a caffeine high. Worship of Brigid was widespread, and her importance is underscored by the fact that she was later assimilated into Christianity as St. Brigid, a neat trick that kept her relevant long after the Roman Empire packed up its legions and headed home. Now, let's talk about the broader societal context. Women in Celtic society could own property, choose their husbands, and lead clans. They had legal rights that would make even some modern legal systems look a bit behind the times. Sure, it wasn't exactly a utopia of gender equality. Patriarchal structures still existed. But compared to many contemporary societies, Celtic women were living the dream, or at least a dreamier version of ancient life. When it came to marriage, women were not just commodities to be traded like livestock. They had a say in the matter. And if the union didn't work out, divorce was on the table, a concept that was as scandalous to Roman sensibilities as pineapple on pizza is to culinary purists today. The economic implications of these roles were significant. Women's participation in religious and economic life wasn't just a cultural quirk. It was a practical necessity. In a society where survival often hinged on the successful harvest or a well-negotiated alliance, excluding half the population from decision-making would have been as foolish as ignoring the weather forecast before a picnic. Women's voices in religious ceremonies and community councils helped ensure that the needs and insights of the entire population were considered, not just those of the men who might have been the loudest in the room. Now, let's bust a few myths. The romantic notion that all Celtic women were warrior queens or magical priestesses, that's a bit of a stretch. Most women were probably more concerned with the daily grind, farming, child-rearing, and managing households, than with wielding swords or casting spells. But the fact that women could potentially rise to positions of power and influence set the Celts apart in a world where many women were expected to remain invisible. It wasn't all epic battles and divine interventions. Sometimes, It was just about keeping the hearth fire burning and the community thriving. The political dynamics were equally intriguing. Women could inherit and transmit land and titles, making them key players in the political chess games of their day. Marriages were often strategic alliances, and women were the linchpins in these political arrangements. Forget about being pawns. These women were the queens on the chessboard, with the power to change the game. And in a society where oral tradition was king, the stories of powerful women were passed down, both preserving their legacies and inspiring future generations. It's important to remember that while the Celts were making strides in gender roles, they were still a product of their time. The reality was a mix of progress and conservatism, with women navigating a complex web of expectations and opportunities. But the fact that women could rise to prominence in both the spiritual and temporal realms speaks volumes about the flexibility and resilience of Celtic society. So, next time you hear tales of Celtic warriors and their exploits, remember that behind the battle cries and the clashing swords, there were women leading prayers, organizing communities, and sometimes picking up a sword themselves. They weren't just the wives, mothers, or daughters of warriors. They were warriors in their own right, whether in the realm of the divine or the mundane. As we continue to unravel the rich tapestry of Celtic history, one thing is clear. These women were as much a part of the story as the men, holding their ground and carving out a legacy that would echo through the ages. While the legacy of Celtic women warriors and priestesses echoes across history, let's pivot to how these ancient beliefs have shapeshifted into the modern age. It's like watching an epic saga transform into a Netflix series. Some details get lost, others get embellished, and a few leave you scratching your head. Welcome to the world where Celtic beliefs meet today's cultural zeitgeist. First off, let's tackle the romanticized image of the Celts. These days, they're often portrayed as mystical forest dwellers with a heartline to the supernatural. Think more Lord of the Rings than Life of Brian. But the reality, not quite as glamorous. These folks were practical, living in a world where survival depended on understanding the Earth's rhythms, not just waving a wand. Yet, this allure of magic and mystery has given rise to modern interpretations that are more fantasy than fact. Take modern paganism, for example. The influence of Celtic practices is undeniable, with many contemporary pagans drawing inspiration from those ancient rites. Think of it as a spiritual buffet where you can pick a little Samhain here, a bit of Beltane there, and maybe a sprinkle of druidic wisdom for good measure. But before you start picturing a coven in your neighborhood park, remember that today's pagans are more likely to be accountants than spellcasters, celebrating nature and the seasons without necessarily donning white robes and chanting incantations. Now, let's not forget how Celtic symbols have permeated popular culture. You can't swing a cat, preferably not in a Celtic village, without hitting a piece of jewelry sporting a Triskelion or a Celtic nod. These symbols, once deeply spiritual, have become commercialized talismans of a sort. They're everywhere, from tattoos to t-shirts, often stripped of their original significance and repurposed as generic signs of coolness. It's the age-old tale of culture meeting commerce, where ancient icons become modern memes. And speaking of memes, let's address the New Age movement. Here, Celtic deities occasionally appear like guest stars in a spiritual soap opera. Brigid might be invoked for healing, while Morrigan makes a cameo as a symbol of female empowerment. It's a spiritual remix where ancient gods and goddesses rub shoulders with chakras and crystal healing. While some might cringe at this cultural cocktail, it's a testament to the enduring appeal of Celtic spirituality, even if it's sometimes more about aesthetics than authenticity. But why this fascination with Celtic beliefs? Part of it is the allure of the other, a world that seems more in tune with nature, more connected to the divine. In an age where technology often trumps tradition, the Celts offer a narrative that feels refreshingly organic. It's a bit like craving the simplicity of a handwritten letter in a world addicted to instant messages. Of course, there's also the appeal of mystery. The Celts left no written records, which means much of what we know is filtered through Roman and later Christian lenses. This lack of first-hand accounts makes them a blank canvas onto which modern imaginations can project whatever they fancy. Celtic history has become a sort of Rorschach test for spiritual seekers, each seeing what they need in its patterns and stories. Yet, let's not forget the harsh realities behind the romance. The Celts were warriors, farmers and traders, living in a world that demanded as much grit as it did grace. They were not just tree-hugging mystics, but a complex society balancing survival with spirituality. Their festivals, so often romanticized as carefree revelries, were in fact strategic gatherings essential for trade, diplomacy, and resource management. Economically speaking, the Celtic model was about as sustainable as it gets. In a time before international trade agreements and online marketplaces, they relied on local networks, seasonal fairs, and barter systems that would make a modern economist nod in approval. Yet, this wasn't just about trade. It was about community resilience, ensuring everyone had what they needed to survive the lean winter months. Politically, the Celts were no strangers to maneuvering through complex alliances. Their society was a tapestry of tribes, each with its own leaders and laws, woven together by shared beliefs and occasional necessity. This wasn't a monolithic empire, but a patchwork of cultures, each with its own identity, yet bound by common threads. It's a reminder that unity doesn't always mean uniformity, a lesson as relevant today as it was millennia ago. So, what does the legacy of Celtic beliefs teach us? For one, it shows how adaptable human spirituality can be. Beliefs that once dictated the rhythm of life for Iron Age communities have evolved, finding new expressions in our digital age. This adaptability is a testament to their enduring relevance, proving that while the gods may change their names and faces, the human quest for meaning is eternal. In conclusion, while the modern world might have given the Celts a makeover, transforming them into avatars of mysticism and romance, the truth is far more nuanced and arguably more fascinating. They were a people deeply connected to their environment, driven by both practical needs and spiritual quests. So, next time you see a Celtic knot or hear about a solstice celebration, remember that behind the symbols and ceremonies lies a rich history, one that continues to shape our cultural landscape in ways both seen and unseen. And with that, we wrap up our journey through the world of the Celts. From warrior queens to druidic rituals, their legacy is a testament to the complexity and resilience of human culture. So, whether you're invoking Brigid for inspiration or just enjoying a pint of mead at your local pub, take a moment to appreciate the tapestry of history woven into our modern lives. After all, the past isn't just a foreign country, it's part of the map that guides us into the future.